Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking again with Jay Shapiro. Jay is a documentary filmmaker and he has articles in Aereo, Arc Digital, a few other places. And I've had him on before to talk about a few things. He's got interesting takes on stuff. And so today we're going to be just diving right into all the current insanity and his latest article that he has in Aereo about some of the stuff in the media and relating to what's going on with all the issues around policing and Black Lives Matter. Hey Jay, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks. I think this is my third time on your show.
Yeah,
I'm your best guest.
Oh no, actually no, you're second, I think, because Sadia and I have been on. She's been on 5 times now. So.
Man, I gotta catch up.
Yeah, it's like the Saturday Night Live thing, like the 6 guest thing. I don't know if you remember.
Oh yeah, you got it. Yeah, like you give me a special prize or something. You get like a special vest.
Yeah.
Send me a microphone or something.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, so how are you doing?
We'll talk about it as well as anyone could be doing right now. I guess it's been a fun ride, a fun adventure. I always love talking to you. You're like this voice in the whirlwind that I check on, and bounce things off of. You're like an underground comedy club in the podcast circuit where I could go and test things out and see if they work, and you tell me if I'm crazy. So you're
well, whatever. I don't know if I'm a good judge of what's crazy or not, but
oh god, yeah. Now who knows?
Okay, I just want to get into like your latest article that you have out in Aereo.
Yeah.
I really like that and I agree with it. But we had a little argument, whatever you want to call it, on Twitter. It was just a couple of tweets back and forth where I was saying if you took the aggregate of CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, you're as bad as Fox, and you were saying no. Have you changed that? Yeah. Have you changed your mind about that?
Well, they're bad. They're certainly bad. They're bad in such different ways that it's hard to compare. So maybe that's what I was disagreeing with.
Yeah.
They're certainly bad. So yeah, I mean, and to be fair, so this article, just to people who haven't read it, it's a short one. I think it's one of my more straightforward ones. I tend to write philosophy stuff and go in these interesting thought experiments. This one was a pretty straightforward, like, hey, here's the thing. So I called it Police Violence and Race: Why the Data Matter and Why They Don't. And it's pretty simple. The first half is why the data matters, which I think is totally obvious to most people, or some people. It's obvious why data matters. But I want to be careful. What I really wanted to do, honestly, was I am getting as frustrated as everyone out there with the claims that the data doesn't matter, or lying about the data, or being rather selective about the data, in particular with this hypothesis of black men, especially black men, but black men and women are being gunned down by the police, disproportionately to the total population. And this proves by itself that there are, just rampant racism in the way that we police this country. That's a provocative claim. And it's one that obviously the data has something to say about. Data always has something to say. Well, maybe even that's too much. Data has something to show. It's up to us to say what the data shows. But data has something to sort of, as I said, if you don't have data, you're always hypothesizing and never falsifying. If you put out a hypothesis in the world, whether it's anything as big as evolution or as small as, I had a headache, then I took aspirin, and the aspirin made my headache go away. That's my hypothesis. Data can help falsify the claim. It can never prove the claim. We know this about science, but it can falsify it. So that's the claim, that black men are being killed disproportionately in this country by police. That's a claim that the data does not falsify. Of course, it shows that. But does that then show the claim that racism is the cause? Well, that's a very different question that it's hard for data to answer. So, but it can say something about it. We can get into that. But really what I wanted to do is the first half of the short article of why data matters is sort of obvious. Of course it matters. The second half of the article, I think, is the more emotional one. And I tend to try to do this a lot, of really give the opposing argument to my intuition about an issue as much, we call this steel manning, of course, but as much sort of sympathy and empathy as possible. So the second half, which is also short, called Why the Data Don't Matter, is more of an emotional thing. And I use this analogy of I use an analogy in a little article where it's like, imagine that you're holding a pencil, you're at your desk or something doing some work, and then you get this phone call, and it's the cops, and they tell you, we found your car and all of the windows have been smashed. and you're pissed, obviously, you're hearing this news, and you immediately suspect this, that the culprit is, and I wrote like an ex-business partner who you've been in this fight with. Like, you're pretty sure this is the only person in the world who's pissed at you enough to do this. And you're pissed, so you slam the phone down and you snap the pencil in half and you throw it against the wall. And that, of course, is like, it's not rational. The pencil did nothing to you, right? Like, if a Spock, like Star Trek alien was watching you, they'd be like, what did this pencil do to them? But human emotion, and human anger in particular, is a very funny emotion that is not rational. And this is not a defense of it. Always, of course, explanations of human behavior are not justifications of them. But it explains, of course, why you threw the pencil. Like, the explanation of like, well, I was pissed and the pencil was in my hand, so I threw the pencil. It's kind of good enough for a human. And so I'm trying to use that as a way to prime the reader for the analogy there of, the rational data of who broke the windows in that little hypothetical is totally like not important to the question of why did that person break the pencil and throw it against the wall. It was just like they were pissed and they did that thing. And so you already see where I'm going with it. The analogy of George Floyd and that image is the pencil breaking, is this kind of outrage and pouring into the streets. And we have to be very careful with that. And then to your question about media, and then I'll let you jump in, the media, you could see what I'm concerned about is, okay, it's not a rational response. We're breaking pencils. That can make some sense because we're humans and we do that kind of thing. But now what? Because if you're trying to, if you break the pencil and you're trying to solve this problem of your ex-business partner breaking your windows, like focusing on the pencil being broken as, somehow material to the solution is obviously the wrong path. So we have to be very careful here about police data and violence against and racism in these claims. If we focus on the wrong thing here, we can make a humongous mess, which of course is why the data actually really matters, not as far as explaining why people are out in the streets yelling, but about what we do now. And that's where I'm concerned about the media and the incentives that seem very misaligned to keep us breaking as many pencils as possible, and cynically not focusing on solutions that don't fit the narrative. So there you go. You take it away. That's why I wrote the article.
Okay, no, and like with the media thing, right? I think they're both bad for two different reasons. Like, there's completely different reasons why I think, Fox News and MSNBC are bad, and they're both bad for different things. But I think what it comes down to essentially, and it's, like them or hate them, but Michael Malice, I think, describes this perfectly. And he says, they're factual, but they're not truthful. So I believe both of them are good. Like that. Yeah. And I mean, I've been saying it's narrative driven, and it's been narrative driven for a while. And so, okay, another thing for like the data doesn't really matter is this was a survey out of New Jersey. This was done in, like, I heard about this in like 2016, 2017, and I don't have it in front of me because I can't find it again. But the numbers were roughly something like self-reporting when they asked people, and they broke it down by race. Black people said something like 35% of the time they would consistently speed. Now this is self-reporting, right? So that there's an issue right there. White people said about 20% of the time
they would speed in their cars on the highway. Yeah.
So, and consistently, not just, okay, I want to overtake someone, okay, or I'm really running late today, I'll go, but no, like consistently always going 10, 15, or whatever. I hear I'm saying kilometers, but like, 10 miles an hour faster, right? Black people got tickets. Only 25% of black drivers got tickets, whereas 35% reported they would speed consistently. So that's underrepresentation on ticketing. Right? And with whites, it was like 25% getting tickets and 20% saying they're speeding. So that's overrepresentation. Now, if a black driver gets stopped and the cop is an asshole, or the cop's had a bad day, or whatever, a multitude of reasons, but that black driver has a bad interaction with that police officer, and you're hearing in the press consistently, cops are targeting black people. Now, it doesn't matter to him that he's statistically not being targeted as much as what's being reported, right? It makes no difference to him. He's pissed off that he's had an asshole cop who's treated him badly, and he thinks back to every single time in the media he's read about cops targeting black people, and then he chalks that up to another instance of racism.
Yeah.
Now, whether he's justified to be pissed off at that cop or not, that's just creating more animosity, right? And so my problem with the media with all this is I'm looking at people like John McWhorter and Coleman Hughes, and, Thomas Chatterton Williams, Camille Foster. Like, there's a whole list of them, right? I mean, and you can go to like the absurd ones like Candace Owens, because she gets some of this too. And they're being called Uncle Toms and race traitors and coconuts. In the UK, I hear the term Bounty, like the Bounty chocolate bar. Like just horrific things. And I think back to ex-Muslims and Majid Nawaz, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. They were two of the Majid's not an ex-Muslim, but Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Ali Rizvi early on, like he was on Joe Rogan, like within the first year or two that Joe Rogan was on. Sarah Hayder was speaking out, like, and they were being called the most horrific things. The same thing, like Majid got called a house Muslim, right? And I'm like, okay, if you can spot that, if you're in the atheist community or you're ex-Muslim or whatever, and you can spot that in the media about Islam, and you can see that slant, why not take a step back and look at these other people who are speaking out? Like I said, who are saying no, there is no racism, or it's not systemic like you're just talking about. It's the remnants of racist policies that were there that are no longer there, but we haven't had a chance to deal with them because we're doing the wrong thing, like you said. So I think that's where the media has a huge problem. Like I think the whole Bush years, Bush 2 years was a trial balloon to see if we can prove that America's racist by saying, it's Islamophobic. And then when Obama gets in, you're that, like, I don't know if you saw those two threads I sent you, like the graphs are showing, like right around the time Obama gets in, the articles on racism, white fragility, white supremacy, all that just starts shooting up. By 2015, 2016, they're like triple what they were in 2008. So there's a problem there. Yeah,
well, there's a lot there that you just laid out. Let me take, because I realized I sort of didn't address it in my first recap of my of your question of like, is Fox as bad as the others and whatever. In the way that they're the same danger is the way that they're all trying to make money. And so when I talk about like the incentives being misaligned, I don't even think any of this is necessarily nefarious on the act of the media, that like they want to incite a race war, or they wanted to incite a race war for some ideological reasons. I think they're a blind force in the market, like just about everything is, that smells money and goes towards it. And the race war makes money, and sowing division makes money, and 2020, the election of 2020 makes money. I mean, the one piece of data so I go through like data, I go through police data, of course, that I've been trolling and trawling, and bringing up from Washington Post. There's a few sources I could talk about, and I actually say like, this is a huge success of the last decade of focusing on this stuff, is actually that the fog of the data is starting to lift. You talk about self-reporting data of individuals, but self-reporting data of police departments reporting their killings when they have them, or their shootings, is getting better. We still have a ways to go, but it's getting better, and the data is getting better. And we just have to, as good scientists, be agnostic to what the data will show and where we can find it. But that data is getting better. I have it in front of me right here. But there's another piece of data that matters that I really wanted to focus on in the article, and it's almost subversive the way I put it in there. But June was the best month ever for cable news ratings. And okay, so that's a hypothesis. Why was it? Like, what would you put out there? And you could say, obviously, the pandemic and people being home plays a role, but doesn't necessarily explain June, because we were locked down before that, and it wasn't even the strictest lockdown in June. Well, the news cycle itself was very loud and very scary and full of race war and full of this and full of vitriol and all of that. If you think a news station is not going to try to repeat what works when they see their bottom line go up and they see their ratings hit an all-time high, you're just crazy, and you don't understand the power of money in the bottom line. And those are the incentives that I'm worried about. And I also put this, they are now competing, to give them some empathy as well. They are competing for your attention and for your eyeballs and your clicks with everybody with a cell phone out there in the world on the internet that can reach you almost as easily as they can with their TV stations now. So it's like this downward vicious cycle. You sort of hinted at it, this downward vicious cycle where it seems like more outrageous, and they try to one up each other. You are now competing with CNN if you go out into a protest and have a cell phone and happen to catch, someone getting punched in the face from Antifa, whatever the hell is happening out there, and you broadcast that. CNN wants that. Fox wants that. So in that way, they're exactly the same. And I want to ask you a question, because this is kind of like crazy. I looked it up this morning. How much money do you think Sean Hannity makes per year? Just his salary, just take a guess.
20 million. I don't know. I have no clue.
It's $40 million.
Oh my God.
Which is crazy.
Well,
and they all make this amount of money. You go down the list, like Rachel Maddow's at like $9 million. Whatever. This is salary. And I looked up, because I couldn't find these numbers. Someone out there listening might be able to do it better than I could. This is a pretty new problem. There's an old famous line about the media that they should report the news and not make the news. We have turned. I don't know how to phrase these sentences without flogging us too much, but it has happened that news anchors are celebrities now and stars. We know this, and they get paid like it. Walter Cronkite was the biggest news anchor in the 60s. Everyone keeps comparing this moment to the late 60s, but this is a factor that's very different. Walter, and I can't find his salary in 1968, but in 1981, which was his most lucrative salary, he was making $1 million, which was basically his last contract, which is about 2.7 in today's terms, which is a lot, but not 40 million. That's the top guy in the game. In the 60s, I imagine it was much, much, much less. And the notion of newsrooms reporting the news rather than making the news was held to in a way that I think we are underestimating the influence and the incentives that are going to make it very difficult to climb out of this moment that wants to keep us in this cycle. And now, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is not only saying the data doesn't matter, but the data itself, or looking at the data itself, is an act of racism, it fits into some narrative that they seem fully committed to because it's lucrative. I don't know how we quite break that. I know there's some hope conversations like this and on the internet and Joe Rogan's of the world that somehow seem outside of that cycle. Maybe that's a response to it, because CNN and Fox are also jealous of Joe Rogan's views, I'm sure, and maybe they'll take cues from that at some point.
And you don't think Hannity's jealous of Rogan's $100 million paycheck now from Spotify?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, he beat. That's true. He beat him. I don't know how many years that was. I didn't look at the details.
but still, okay, like $100 million. I mean, Rogan himself said that's obscene. But okay,
but just to give you the credit there, in that way, Fox and CNN and MSNBC are all the same kind of problem, that the incentives, they could tell whatever story they want. CNN was the one who broadcast Trump rallies without cuts in 2016 and then said, "Oh, sorry about that." No, you liked the clicks. And Donald Trump is right when he says that the media loves him. He knows they're addicted to ratings. It's like we created a world that, and I also want to just put in, I'm talking a lot about money in markets here. Markets are not just money. Markets are also clicks and likes and retweets, and there is there's a currency to that, just as sort of social status goes, that we also have to talk about, and the amplification of that. And news media is also addicted to that. This is a problem that is beyond just sort of looking at the bottom line. It's easy to sort of see the market incentives when Sean Hannity gets paid $40 million, but we can look at the race to the clicks and the race to the bottom. And I worry about this being a wrecking ball through conversation, and seeing the way that these incentives seem to be wreaking havoc on looking at data. One more thing about the data. I know I'm talking a lot, but one more thing about the data. The point of data and the point of looking at data, I want to be very clear about this, because I've and also as an aside, I got pretty good at spreadsheets and doing data analysis because I love fantasy baseball. This is not I have a Google sheet that I have in front of me now that I've been promoting a lot on my Twitter and stuff that has all the police killings, and you could do a lot of data analysis, but it's because I wanted to win in fantasy baseball, and I got good at how do I beat my friends? What is causing my team to do well or poorly here? These are things you can. So here's the thing.
So you're playing Moneyball?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, baseball is the best game for it because you have a lot of variables that are controlled. Anyway, we can talk about that. But what data can do is it does not tell you the answer. Like I said, it falsifies hypothesis, and it could highlight things that might be the way to the place to intervene. So here's the question. I also want to be clear about this. In my article and in my stance, racism is real. And something like systemic racism, I know that term gets used very nefariously by the critical race theorists and stuff, but something like, the residue, I definitely put the drug war, the war on drugs in America, which started with like overtly racist inception, is still a problem. And we have to talk about, if you mean those kind of things and redlining and whatever else is racism, we could talk about those things. And I am not dismissing those, but here's what the data can do. The data can highlight areas where you may be finding a causal relationship between the thing that you're looking at and the variable you're putting in. For an example, this is an example I use a lot, and I like it. It's very simple. If you are looking at a train platform, imagine you're in a very busy train platform, and you know nothing sort of about the world, and you notice that the train arrives in the station just after a whole bunch of humans stand on the train platform. So, okay, there's a correlation. Train platform fills up, train comes. But is that a causal relationship? You could test that. You and I are smart enough to know right now that it's not, but you could test that. You could be like, I have a hypothesis. A crowded train platform causes a train to arrive at that station. So you test it by, let's put a bunch of people on a train platform and see if a train comes. Oh, it doesn't come. That can't be the causal relationship. So you look for other causal relationships. Obviously, it's something like, a train schedule and pressing a button. A very complicated thing. It explains the causal relationships of why a train comes. But if a train coming at that station late every day was a problem that you wanted to solve as like the manager or consultant for this train station, and you were looking at that variable of like, I know how to solve the problem, just fill the platform with people and then the train will come on time, you would fail because you did not find the causal relationship. So good data analysis cannot be a creative solution for you, but it could highlight things in areas that may be a place to intervene. So here's the question. If the problem is racism in America, and particularly for the black community, where ought we intervene? And so if your hypothesis is the black community doesn't have the kind of equality of opportunity that we all long for. Not equality of outcome, it's equality of opportunity that we all long for. And it doesn't have it. And so we want to fix that. And if your hypothesis is, I think the reason is cops are killing too many of them, and that's what's causing the problem. Okay, that's a hypothesis. The data could actually start to highlight things for you about where you ought to intervene. And when you look at the data, that is not the place to intervene. And that's why this is scary, because yes, blacks are disproportionately killed. They make up 13% of the population in America, and they make up between, depending what you're looking at, 30 and 35%, or 25 and 35% of all the killings. So what causes this disparity? Well, you start to fold in other things that may be what we call the confounding variables. A confounding variable like poverty. Okay, let's put poor people in there of all races. Let's put education rates. Let's put single-parent homes. Let's fold in nutrition values. Let's fold in all of these things. And here's the scary part, like what you will find when you start doing that, of course, your racial disparities will start to flatten at that point. So you might think, ooh, yes, the place to intervene is we need better nutrition. The place to intervene is we need better after-school programs. Things like, I'm a huge sports fan, as you know, and sports programs show a tremendous promise at pushing these kind of things in the right directions. Oh, we need to fix the drug war. Oh, we have too many guns out there. Like, you could start to find better places to intervene than just the cops killing people. But here's the scary part that people don't want to talk about, and this is what I think is driving the religion that I think you want to get to of the wokeism, is even if you start to flatten all of those variables, you will not flatten it all the way. If you flatten all of the economic variables and all of the nutritional values and all of these other things that are systemic, the war on drugs or whatever, you will still be left with a disparity, because there are also ideas in people's head. This is something that my co-host Coleman talks a lot about. We have to be able to talk about not just, education rates. We have to be able to talk about cultural ideas, and it would be insane to not talk about clusters of populations that tend to cluster along phenotypical lines of race and whatever else and ethnicity that have ideas in their heads, and they might have different values, cultural values that emphasize different things. That may also be a factor that you can still put into your analysis. It's harder to do. You need to do polling and this kind of stuff into your data analysis that might highlight, oh, the thing we need to do is also talk about this. This is, of course, to bring it back full circle to your question, where Reform Muslims and ex-Muslims are not afraid to talk about ideas that are different in different cultures and how they also produce outcomes. And in fact, of course, you could put them in the driver's seat. It becomes a chicken and egg question. But that is the thing that is sacrilegious to talk about in the woke community, is talking about differences. And when someone, just for the final thing, when someone tries to flatten the variables of like, it seems like the right science experiment, as if you have an immigrant group from Africa who are also black. So if racism itself was the main factor, they ought to suffer the same kind of racism that African Americans do. But we don't tend to see that. In fact, African immigrant communities do tremendously well. So then you have to start thinking about different ideas in their heads. And this is where I am fully upset with the media, because I am fairly convinced that a very pronounced, loud victimhood narrative that gets pushed upon them, and has, of course, like you said, some facts to it, although not a lot of, let's say, helpful truths to it, is a bad idea to entrench in a new generation of people who are, frankly, doing pretty well if this damn narrative would get out of their way. And this is where people like Camille, and even as much as we don't like her, someone like Candace, attracts a lot of attention for some of the sort of like, just gumption, do it yourself, climb yourself out. Because I think the victimhood narrative itself, and you brought this up, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And but what I was touching on there was the sacrilegious notion of people are still deathly afraid to talk about bad ideas in a culture that is not theirs. We're still dealing with the cultural relativism, fear and poison that we just have to get through. And it's driving me crazy, obviously.
Okay, but I mean, the cultural relativism stuff, I mean, because you did bring up a lot there, that it's still around, and, things like critical race theory are using it, but that's been around since the 60s via postmodernism, right? So there's two different strains of it now, if you want to talk about it. But this whole thing, like you're talking about, like, are you focusing on the wrong thing? Because so critical race theory, everything is racism. So it's not, was there racism present? It's how was racism present in this situation, right? It's always how was, not there, which two different questions. And if you look at queer theory, it's always transphobia. Gender theory, it's, sexism, patriarchy, this and that. It's always the same thing.
Now, they've decided that it's a variable you can't look at. This is why it's an anti-scientific and religious thing. They're telling me, as someone who's looking at the data, that there's no question left to ask. The question of racism is the foundation, and that is why it's a very scary, unscientific religious movement.
But also, when you look at what they say, like, okay, this, I'm going to give you like this you can consider this tinfoil hat, Alex Jones, goop level crazy, okay? Like, but again, this is from speaking to a couple academics. If you look at some of the work like Jonathan Haidt's done, or even some of the things Christine Hoff Sommers talks about. So critical race theory, intersectionality, intersectionality, I think, 89 was around when Crenshaw started writing the papers about it. Before that, you had black feminism. Queer theory had some of it in the 80s and stuff. But I don't, like, as full-fledged fields in the academy, not as parts of other fields, and teaching that was roughly around 89 to 91. That's roughly when they came in. If you follow that, then, and you just follow how long does it take you to get a bachelor's, how long does it take you to get a master's, how long does it take you to get a doctorate, by the late 90s you'll have people who are getting doctorates and masters getting out of university. And again, I'm gonna make the claim that by the late 90s, I'm not saying things were perfect. I'm not saying things were, but they were even great. I think things were really good, and it progressed to the point where we got to the colorblind stage, where it didn't really matter. And we could go back and deal with things like, okay, in St. Louis, and this was, okay, whatever, Tim Pool, I saw this on his Twitter feed. Like, he was talking about this thing in St. Louis.
Man, you still follow a lot of real.
I follow a lot of weird people. I know.
But put yourself through it. Anyway,
yeah, but anyway, so they have like, they created these segregated townships for black people. Now,
yeah,
they were only a couple of miles, they're a little township, like a couple miles square type of thing. But you might have to go through 5 of these townships to get to work. And you're black and you're poor, you don't have enough money to fix your tail light. On your drive to work, you get 5 different tickets, $20 a pop. You can't even pay one of them, now you have 5 to pay, right? They got rid of segregation, they got rid of all that. But these were still depressed communities. And it was now, I guess, predominantly black, but it's a mixture of, they are mixed, and the one thing they all have in common is they're poor. And this affects every single person in one of those communities. So that is a systemic racism. Like, that was a racist policy, and the systemic oppression is still there. But if you go looking to solve that by solving race, you're not going to fix that problem, right? There is a racial component because more black people are affected. But now they're not being affected because they're black, they're being affected because they're poor. Yeah. So if you go to fix the racism problem there, you're not going to fix it. And so, like, this is my crazy theory here. So, like, these people got out of masters and PhDs. Now they're looking for work. By the end of the 90s, it's like the Clinton era is coming to a close. Oh, we want to deal with racism. We want to fix all these other inequities that are still there. Oh, this guy's got a PhD in, race theory. Well, we need a chemist. We're going to hire a PhD in chemistry. We need someone to fix racism. We're going to hire a PhD in, race theory. Yeah. So you got a bunch of these interns coming to government. You got a bunch of these interns coming to media. You got a bunch of these interns, and lower level management. By the time Bush's term ends, these people have hired more people who think like them because, again, you want to fight racism, you go hire a race theorist, right? And so they're part of the establishment now. Like, your Congress, or was it earlier this year, or was it last year, passed a diversity, inclusion, and equity committee or something like that. I don't know how binding it is. Washington State, they've got that, even though the voters didn't want it. The next session of their legislature, they passed it. We've got that in our government, right? This is so. The New York Times earlier this year, or was it? Yeah, it was earlier this year. No, sorry, it was earlier last year, and then over Hanukkah of last year, right? So middle of last year, 4 black girls got beat up by 2 South Asian kids, 2 South Asian boys, and one of the boys, I think, pissed on one of the girls or all 4 of the girls, whatever. It's just horrific, right? New York Times op-ed, front page of the op-eds. It's a problem of whiteness. Right. Okay, that's a fucking problem. That's huge. No, but okay. In Hanukkah last year, when they were killing Jews like every night almost, and the last night there was that black guy. He was like one of the black Israelites or whatever, the black Hebrews. I don't know what you call that group. Again, the New York Times, like, let's not make this about whiteness. Let's not take in whiteness and attack each other during the riots. Oh well, Jews have taken on whiteness because they were part of the slave trade, and property is violence, property is whiteness. So you should be glad to get rid of your property. You pay reparations. I mean, this stuff is coming from somewhere. And if you want to talk about like anti-Semitism or whatever, look at the anti-Semitism. I'm sorry, Black Lives Matter as a movement, they're aligned with, and they're not one big group, so that's a problem. But some of them are aligned with Nation of Islam. Some of them are aligned with CARE. They say shit like property is violence. I mean, Nicole Hannah-Jones is saying it, and she's got a Pulitzer, for Christ's sakes. Okay, sorry, my rant's going to go on for the Pulitzer Center, right? You can look on their website now. I'll send you the link. All their prizes are now going to be based on diversity, and equity, and inclusion, and it's going to be a moving goalpost. Yeah.
Well, so I don't know, like, what I don't know where I should jump in.
I know I put a lot there, but I mean, like, it's all crazy. There's so much there that we got to fix.
Well, so this is the other thing about fixing stuff. Yeah. And what I think what lens we use, how much we zoom out or zoom in here, kind of matters when looking at all this stuff. I agree with you on the academia. I guess I'm always asking a lot of like why questions, because my question about, I tend I love philosophy, as you know, but I tend to think about psychology more than philosophy, actually. And I tend to ask the question of, like, why are people attracted to that? Because I give people the benefit of the doubt. I think people can be, obviously, we know, very stupid, but people are not that stupid. And there's so much out there, and there's moments, it sounds, I could hear it in your voice, where you'll hear somebody make an argument or an article like that, where you have to wonder, are they actually that stupid that they don't know how to understand, like, very basic statistical analysis, like I just did with, like, the train station, or are they do they badly want the answer to be something else, and it's just a psychological sort of, a roadblock that they will not get over because, I wrote another article, it's the implications they fear of allowing themselves, like the implications of doing all the data, being smart enough to know that if you flatten all the variables that I talked about, about police killings and race, for example, you're still going to be left with a disparity in different communities. It will not erase it. You are stuck with, I think in their minds, the implication that certain cultures have better ideas than others, and it's an idea in their head that they do not want in their head because they think it makes them David Duke or the KKK or whatever. And so I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt of not being stupid for a long time, and I'm still doing it. So with the critical race theory stuff, which is it seems like, are they really this? Is it really this stupid? Is it really that they don't understand it? And I don't think it is. And now, because we could talk about religious people being stupid, or if it is a religion, it's more of a psychological, let's call it prayer, because that's their word, a psychological prayer for the world to be a different world than the one we actually live in. I think that's what religion generally is, which is, again, sympathetic, because death is weird and real, and we live in a chaotic universe, and bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, and it seems very crazy. And so you desperately want the universe not to be like that, and so you badly want there to be some sort of cosmic order in the world, and so you believe it. And so I don't, like, it's a stupid conclusion from some point of view, but it's also a sympathetic one, because there's actually psychological blocks happening to it. So my question is really, like, so why are people attracted to all that stuff that you put out there? Why were the kids I went to college with? Your rant was good, and you took it up to, like, the late 90s, which, of course, is no coincidence that planes flew into our buildings at the exact wrong time, when these kinds of theories felt very harmless. Like, okay, these kids just sort of are, it's a fringe idea on college campuses, and we don't really need to worry about it so much. But when the plane flew into the towers, and people who weren't stupid could do the little calculus in your head and be like, you know what, I think the ideas in that fueled that particular thing, if I flatten all the variables, even of colonialism and blowback and racism and all the Afghan war and abandoning bin Laden, it's you can't do the data analysis as cleanly as you could for something like baseball or even police race killings, but you know intuitively that you're going to find an answer that leaves the only variable left to look at, or one of the major causal variables, ideas in their heads. And it's just such a scary thought for people, and I think we're still dealing with it. So when those planes flew into the towers, the escape route, oddly, to not let that thought into your head was this weird critical race theory thing. And you were right. They were poised, getting degrees and whatever, so a lot of them got high jobs. Or I don't think you're being Alex Jonesy about it. I think it is what it is. But that moment was also particularly bad for us in a way I don't think that we understood, because, again, of social media's rise and the media changing very rapidly, where we suddenly were giving a lot of influence and power to youth, frankly, who, for a lot of reasons, are attracted to these ideas. And suddenly they had not just the pulpit, but they had sway over the media in a way that was kind of brand new and snuck up on us. So it just exploded into our discourse at that moment. And now I don't know how to unentrench it. And, we could talk about going back in a time machine. How would you have stopped that thing? I don't even know. It was such a bad combination of technology and events. And
no, but 9/11, like, that's, I've talked to a couple of people about this. This was like a really bad unintended consequence of 9/11. It was like the perfect storm of the internet going more ubiquitous.
Yes.
Right. And a few years later, social media starting, but then the rise of the narrative. Because right away you had Islam as a religion of peace. I mean, Bush said it 2 days after 9/11, right? So you had that narrative rise up. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that there wasn't narrative-driven news before, and you had stuff, and there was opinion pieces and this and that. But more often than not, at least there was facts coming through that you could just look at and judge. But after 9/11, I think that's when, like, again, I'm not saying they did this on purpose and we're going to overthrow this or whatever. Like, this is what they were taught, or call it indoctrination, whatever, but this is what they learned, and they learned to look at it through that lens. That was the methodology they were given, and that's what they did.
Let me sharpen even something I said, because I think that's an important point. There's always been, you called it like narrative-driven news. There's always been opinion pieces. Yeah. That's not new. Although it's gotten obviously much more. It's gotten worse, and news like Sean Hannity making $40 million is not because he knows how to read a teleprompter. It's gotten worse, but you're right. That's not entirely new. We're always deciding. I mean, I'm a filmmaker. I edit. I can't. We could go back to the Vietnam War, like the images that come out of there and what you decide to put on the news. These are selections that, whether consciously or not or whatever, are building a narrative that you hope, as you brought up earlier, aligns with something like the true story. That's what good reporting ought to be. You're never going to bring your audience directly to Vietnam and be like, this is exactly what it's like, and you're going to sit them down for like a 12-hour lecture on like the history of Vietnam. No, you've got time and you've got to deliver something. And if you're doing your job as a journalist, they walk away being able to, take a test and answer questions about what happened there in a way that they would sort of pass. So we're always building narratives, and we're always talking about what things mean in some bigger context that go beyond the facts. That's kind of fine. But what you're right about that seems a little scarier here is the air and the illusion of academic and scientific rigor behind it, where they will not tell you that it's an opinion piece. What I'm telling you about the police data, like the Crenshaw thing of the question is not was racism present, it's how did it manifest in this instance. They are not saying that's like an opinion piece. Like anyone feel free to write an opinion piece that puts everything into that narrative, and fine, we could disagree with it and we could talk about it. But if you tell me that is like academic rigor and science, this is where, it makes my hair stand on end, because you're talking about science as a methodology of being in contact with reality. And if you're telling me that is science, what you just said is you do not question this hypothesis cannot be questioned, we both know that is literally the definition of religion. It's do not ask this question. And I still feel and fear beneath that, to be sympathetic to it, beneath that is a fear that of Charles Darwin, that we actually live in a world where we are not blank slates, where we are born with some innate value. I put this up the other day, and I think it's the most important point to talk about if we're going to talk about this deep philosophical lens of the moment we're in. What we are badly struggling with as a species to contend with, and we always have been, but now it just is so in our face, is the two truths. I put this in an article I wrote, but it's in our Declaration of Independence, maybe our Constitution, maybe I got it wrong. All men are created equal. This is the line. Ben Franklin was the one who put the edit to Thomas Jefferson where it said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And it's a beautiful edit, an edit that may have saved the country up until now, where Thomas Jefferson's original line, and I won't get it right here, was something more like divinely inspired or something. It was a reference to God, that all men are created equal. Franklin changed it to the secular kind of wording of self-evident, all men are created equal. And in some ways that is true, because consciousness is weird, and all sentience has this impenetrable quality that we just, you could call it soul if you're religious. There is this value to the process of experience that is on some level equal, morally equal. But the second truth that we have to contend with and somehow make along true with the first one is that all men are not created with equal ability, equal opportunity, equal impulses, equal heights, equal everything. We don't come, and so that is not just the physical characteristics, that's also ability and ideas. Some people may be born. It would be a miracle of evolution, a statistical miracle, if everybody was born with the exact same level of intellect or something like that, or moral talent, right? Of course we aren't. But those two things, keeping that in mind, and that all men are also created equal, somehow is the job of philosophy, is the job of politics. How do we make both of those true? Because if you fall so quickly to the second one, that all men are not created with equal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you hear the whispers of Nazism, you hear the whispers of skull measuring, you hear the whispers of eugenics, and you're fucking terrified. So what we've done, because we're so terrified of that, and maybe the horrors of the 20th century has rightfully made us fear that, with literally memories of concentration camps, is run to the other one, that all men are created equal. And what we're going to do by all men are created equal, which means if all men are genuinely created equal, that means somehow, you explain this one to me, that East Africans winning all the marathons and white people is not a product of genetics or an unequal distribution of talent or this or that. It must be somehow a product of systemic, cultural ideas or whatever, cultural evolution. It's all nurture, no nature. Yeah. So what we're doing, and of course, police violence must be, the disproportion must be because of racism. It's the same kind of equation you do there. And so what we're doing by running to the first truth, that all men are created equal, and trying so hard to ignore the second truth, is cutting ourselves off from, so it's the nature-nurture argument still, but it's denying nature in the grand scheme, which is, as you know, the only method we have of discovering nature is science. And so now we're at this precipice that's very scary of now attacking, shutting down STEM, being afraid of science. And so it's up to give them all the credit. These are hard truths to weave together. They are hard to weave together. How do I tell you that all men are created equal, but this person is smarter than this person? Well, they're not equal in that respect, but cosmically they're somehow equal. Majid does have a nice line with this, that all men everybody deserves dignity, but no one's above scrutiny. We could talk about a different language of how to get to this, but I think it's a deep fear of science, and it's why I put up, and I'm terrified that they're coming for Charles Darwin. I mean, they've been doing it.
They are. Okay, forget biology. They came for biology around 2016, right? Like okay, here's where you get into trouble, right? Mm-hmm. Queer theory is not about gay rights, lesbian rights. Like queer theory, if you look at it, that's where people get all, gays just want to sleep with little kids because Judith Butler and Gail Rubin, wanted to normalize pedophilia. But that's queer theory. That's also where you get Pete Buttigieg isn't really gay. He's just a man who sleeps with other men, but he doesn't embrace his queerness, so he's not gay, right? So queer theory is a very specific thing here. So that's where you get some of this stuff. But so they came after biology already. I mean, there was an article a few months back.
I want to jump in there. You could keep going, but I think what's also, let me throw this out there too, because I'm talking a lot about the 20th century and this moment we're in. I think there's another thing really fueling this. You're getting at it with the queer theory thing, actually. There's another element that we should recognize here. I think if we look back one day, we'll recognize this, that we're also at a time where more than ever in human history, you can alter that second truth, that all men are not created with equal this, equal that, whatever. You're talking about it a little bit with the queer theory thing. You can change, the claims that you could change your sex are obviously anti-science by this, but changing your gender you could do. And of course, J.K. Rowling gets in, the J.K. Rowling thing in queer theory is right on that target, where it's obviously a fear of nature and a fear of Charles Darwin. But we also have to recognize that there are new abilities, whether it's through plastic surgery or through artificial intelligence or augmentation or whatever, to change your nature in a way that is, we should put that on the table here, of changing your nature, because maybe that's what we need to talk about and do here, rather than denying that nature is a thing, and so everything is everything is a result of prejudice and imbalance. There's an ability now to morph and change and resist and fight against nature, which I'm actually sympathetic to. And that's also why this is so scary, because as an atheist, it's like we're not stuck with nature. We can change it.
We can change it,
but denying that it's actually real, of course, is not the way to solve that problem.
Okay, but here's the thing. The thing with science with these people, right? Like, it's these people. But, like, if you look at critical race theory, okay, the religious aspect of it, the way I've been thinking about it, and again, just ask someone who used, self-proclaimed SJW, like former SJW, whatever. Think of intersectionality like Christianity, right? So intersectionality is Christianity. Critical race theory is Catholicism. Queer theory is Lutheranism. Fat studies is whatever, Mormonism. Like, they're different branches of that. Queer theory and critical race theory will look at identity two different ways, right? They're both a weird mix of blank slateism and essentialism, but different one. They rely on different things at different times, and but they go in opposite directions on identity. But so, like, these things are all focused on your identity as X, right? So if it's in fat studies, being a fat person, blah blah blah, like that's your identity. So that would be like, do you think of Christ as a Trinity or just as one person, right? And that's how they're vary. But it is anti-science. Like, I mean, they talk about white ways of knowing, and that's like when they say that, like, okay, I don't know how much intersectionality and critical race theory you've read. So if this is stuff I'm telling you already know, let me know. But, like, they're basically telling you that, like, when they say systemic racism, they're saying the whole system is racist, and what they mean by the system is the system of whiteness. So that includes the Enlightenment, that includes science, right? Before the Enlightenment, everything was a garden. The Enlightenment was the serpent that came in, and white folk ate that apple, like or whatever. White people brought the serpent in, and the Enlightenment was a fruit of the tree of was a tree of knowledge, and we ate it. White people ate it, and then they conquered the world with it. So that's what they want gone. They want the Enlightenment gone. So no, they don't like science. Yes, if you do a study and the data doesn't show what they want it to show, the study was racist. The data is racist. That's why in Seattle you have critical race.
It's the method of reading it is racist.
Yeah, but science, that's why in Seattle, K through 12, and as far as I know, it's the only school district doing this, but it's critical race math.
The Northwest.
No, but I mean, come on, critical race math. Like,
I know. You're talking to Benjamin Boyce. He's like stuck in it, so it's like, the Northwest is a particular. It's a shame. It's a beautiful part of the world.
Okay, whatever, man. New York City. There's
spreading.
Asian families want to sue the director of the school department. I don't know what the guy's name is, but he's also bringing in stuff about this white ways of knowing that, I'll try to find the video for you, is a guy giving a lecture to school boards and things like that, saying that being on time is acting white.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you've been to Africa. You're like, yeah.
Okay, but here's the thing: they're teaching that to kids, right? They're also for a few years now. Teachers and administrators have been told to, if a black kid or a brown kid is late with their assignment, cut them some slack, because that's just culturally insensitive if you don't.
I think I saw this with a professor. There was a bunch of white kids who were asking and then demanding, of course, that all of the students of color be exempt from the final because of all the stress or whatever. And it's like, no. Or
okay, that was at UCLA or Berkeley.
UCLA.
So
this stuff has happened.
Yeah.
So here's where you brought up lawsuit. Like, actually, I became a real court watcher when I made a film about international law a bunch of years ago, and it gave me a whole reverence and respect for the court. Here, when you were talking about the people moving into, I call them people also, critical race. Let's call them activists, because they're not academics. Activists coming out with degrees, getting jobs. I'm worried about judges. It hasn't happened yet, but you didn't mention judges, or even you can mention lawyers, because they've definitely infiltrated lawyers. The ACLU.
It started in law schools. It started in law schools. Derek Bell was a lawyer. Kimberly Crenshaw was at Harvard Law under Derek Bell.
They get there's a long history of. Let's talk about this, because in that film I also dove into the profession of law. Which in America, I don't know how it is in Canada, it's been like a running joke of, slimy lawyers our entire lives or whatever. They just have this reputation. I think we don't we don't give lawyers enough credit. The good lawyers especially are incredibly important, and revolutionaries around the world went to law school. It's a place, and it's not and not just lawyers, like activists. Gandhi was a lawyer. We forget that Gandhi went to law school. Maybe not a very good lawyer, but he was attracted to that, and then he left.
Wasn't Ho Chi Minh as well in law school in France?
Tons of them. I'm trying to remember some of the others. And maybe Martin Luther King was a reverend. I don't think he had a law degree. Maybe I'm getting that wrong.
There was a lot of lawyers in the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yes, there are lawyers around, because people who are attracted to the profession of law can be very interesting. They can be attracted to wanting to rule people. They can be attracted to wanting to change people's ideas. Most of them who leave it and become activists, like these critical race theorists, realize that being a good lawyer is not making laws, but it's interpreting laws. I mean, being a good lawyer is arguing the case of what you want the law to mean and defending this. Being a good judge is not legislating from the bench, but actually interpreting what the law says and what it means. And that's pretty dissatisfying for an activist, because they are set on changing the laws. So a lot of them then leave and take to the streets, and they become activists, like Gandhi did, who was discovering all kinds of laws that he didn't like.
Or like those two lawyers in the protests in New York City who threw the Molotov cocktail.
Happens all the time. And so I'm worried about the profession of law, because this is an institution much maligned that we don't give enough. Well, we do every 4 years. We're like, hey, protect the Supreme Court. So far, the courts are holding. But this is what's coming, and this is what we have to watch for. Courts, I'm fascinated by the legal fallout and the challenges that are going to come from the infiltration of this stuff and the mainstreaming of this stuff. I know there's this one case, and it's in New York or something. I think it's the Department of Education, and the white person who's suing, with a bunch of them now suing based that they were discriminated against based on their race of being white and wrongful termination. It's going to be a very interesting case to watch. At this point, I have no doubt that they will win that case. But if they lose it, I'm going to be a little horrified. And what has happened under our noses, we all, of course, in this conversation know about what happened to the Southern Poverty Law Center, who are also lawyers, but also got very corrupt by this stuff very early on. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, I put something up of this collision of such interesting things, again in the Northwest, but this ordinance from the city to wear masks for everybody, but people of color are exempt.
In Oregon,
Yeah, if they say, they're too worried about racial profiling or something, which I actually don't physically understand, because it's covering your face. But anyway, if you could say, like, wearing a mask as a black person, I'm afraid for my life because cops are going to be scared because of my mask. I don't want to wear the mask. This is a fascinating legal case. Fascinating. Because now what you have, if white people sue, if anybody in that city sues, saying, this is crazy, you're putting my health at risk, you're discriminating against me and my health. Let's call it my right to pursue happiness as a tenet that's protected in the Constitution, because of my race. This is fascinating. I don't know if they'll win this case or not, but I immediately was like, I hope the ACLU takes this up, because I could see it going pretty far. And then I looked at the story, and it was the ACLU that actually advocated for the policy, and I was like, holy shit, this is a problem.
Yeah.
But, so we have it on the lawyer side now. But just one more thing to this, and it's something that we overlook sometimes. I'll give you a weird analogy, but it's happening on the lawyer side, which is very scary. You have activist lawyers who are pushing for this stuff, but it'd be much, much scarier if it happens on the judge side. It hasn't. I don't see it happen on the judge side yet. The Supreme Court, it seems pretty immune to this stuff. And the reason is, we're talking a lot about market incentives and incentives to keep your job. They have lifetime appointments, which is a controversial thing that a lot of people hate. And I actually love it and think it was one of the most brilliant things that the founders did, was give lifetime appointments. And here's why. When you have a lifetime appointment and you're not worried about losing your job, you can kind of do whatever the hell you want. Like, nobody's coming to cancel. There's no cancel culture at the Supreme Court. In the nomination process, of course, there's plenty of it, but there's none once you're in, this stuff can't touch you. And this then makes you impervious to the mob that has different ideas coming after you. It's also very important that we get good judges in there, and we need to really be careful, obviously, as much as I'm not excited about them. I hope Biden beats Trump, even if it's just to get the nomination. I don't know if Ruth can live another 4 years, but this is an important thing. And for an example that will make sense to everybody about this, well, if you're an American football fan, famous, again, back to the statistics, you do the statistics, and American football teams punt on fourth down, giving the ball to the other team, if you aren't football fans, more than they ought to. The statistics say you ought to go for it on fourth down. But if you go for it on much more than they do. But if you go for it on fourth down and you don't make it, the other team gets the ball where you left it. And they're sometimes much, it's much easier to score or whatever, especially in the fourth quarter. Punting on like a fourth down with 3 yards to go or whatever is often a bad idea in a close game, just given the statistics. But if you punt as the coach, who's the coach's decision, as you punt, and the other team then comes and does a whole drive and wins the game, and the reporters ask you about it, you're like, well, I thought my defense could hold up and, could do that, which is a much less you're going to get fired kind of answer. It's much less risky for the coach rather than saying, if you're you went for it and you didn't make it and the other team got the ball on the 10-yard line and then they scored right away and you lost the game, the mob is upset. You're all these biases that you screwed up for this risky decision happen. So because of that pressure, coaches tend to not go for it on fourth down as much as they should, except coaches that have very, very good job security, like Bill Belichick for the New England Patriots and like Doug Peterson for the Philadelphia Eagles and a few others. And that is the analogy there that you already see is give job security to judges and they are less likely to make this mistake. So I'm fascinated when with what's coming is judges being forced to rule on what seems like incredibly obvious lines in the amendments and in the Constitution about discrimination against race, but it's going to be put to the test in courts in this country.
It has in Canada, and I'm going to okay. No, I'll give you a couple examples, right?
Yeah.
Jessica Yaniv. So Bill C-16 came in, and you couldn't misgender someone, right? And if you self-ID'd,
I know.
You had to get all the rights of a woman, right? So Jessica Yaniv destroyed the lives of 16 immigrant women, right? Mm-hmm. Most of them lost their businesses. They got back, I think, $2,000 each. That's what their judgment was. Yay. Now the BC Human Rights Commission has a definition of a Brazilian wax which is performed on a biological vulva. Okay.
Right.
Now, Yaniv had cases thrown out before, and kept learning and just said, okay, I made this mistake last time. And this time, if you actually read the judgment, it was because Yaniv was a bad witness, and it was just clear that, wanted money. So this stuff is meant to be gamed. So it's already coming to courts. There was another case in, I want to say Calgary, but it was in Alberta, and it was 4 or 5 years ago. It was a First Nations woman hold up a sign. She held up a sign saying, I want to kill white men or kill all white men.
Right.
We have hate speech laws in Canada, which I hate. I don't like hate speech laws. She was not found to have committed a hate speech crime or a hate crime by holding up a sign because of past oppression. We had 2 immigrants. One was let off on because he molested a little boy because, that's that's part of his culture and he didn't know not to do it. Another one got a 1-year suspended sentence for raping a woman, again because of that stuff. Now that's judges, so it's already coming into, where do you get judges from? Lawyers? Where are you getting lawyers? It's if there's already, I'm seeing it in left-wing lawyers. I see some of the things they're saying, and they're not full on into it, but they're using some of the terminology. I'm like, because it started from law school, so it's seeping into law. There's a woman I interviewed.
Okay, well, so this is where this one's going to come to. The first case I think they're going to end up hearing is a transgender one. This will be an interesting test, but I'm not sure if, we'll talk about it. I'm not sure if it's the right analogy, particularly with the race one that I'm talking about, but because it's complicated. But transgender athletes competing in male sports is coming, and I don't know if the Supreme Court in the U.S. is set to rule on any of that, or if they accepted it. Actually, I don't think they accepted to hear it. I think it was Idaho. There's a school there. There's a case that I have my eye on that might make its way all the way. That's going to be a fascinating one because. So yeah, to your point. It's a tricky one because it's a definition of sex versus gender, which is a real split. Saying sex is real, I know, can get you in trouble these days. But if you look at the Supreme Court when I put this out because it was just so funny, when they ruled on discrimination and basically said you can't fire someone because they're transgender or gay or whatever, and they went through it, like you read the opinion, and basically, yeah, they say sex is real on every fucking page. And you saw a bunch of, critical race theorists, probably activists and transgender queer community celebrating and like saying, fuck you, J.K. Rowling, which is just fun. They didn't read the opinion. So like there's no problem there, no seepage there. Because that one, yeah, they should have won that case. It was great. I wasn't worried, and I actually wasn't worried about it at all. That's why I'm actually still a little optimistic here that there's a line holding against this madness, and it's in the courts, and it's not budging at all. The cases in Canada, those are borderline. Those are iffy. I'm wondering that, and I don't. Yeah, hate speech laws are weird, but let's talk about this one. If transgender versus self-identifying your gender. If I say I'm a woman because I feel like a woman, and then I enter a weightlifting competition and I beat all the women, and there's prize money involved and there's career this and et cetera involved, and then they sue based on the policies of the thing, that's what's coming. I think it's actually a track and field one that they're worried about in Idaho, but that one I think is very. I'll be worried. I think I'll be worried if the highest courts. Maybe I'm not as worried as like human rights councils or whatever in Canada. I'll be worried if the highest courts, especially in the United States, start to interpret. Because what's the complication here? You're pointing to like hate speech laws and human rights tribunal, which already are really badly written laws that are very. But the Constitution and the amendments here about discrimination based on race, sex, religion, creed, etc., are so plainly written that if the definitions of race and racism that are so wrong and toxic that are going around the mainstream right now start to seep its way into the bench that they interpret it that way, that you cannot have a racist policy if it discriminates against white people, that's when I'll be worried. I haven't seen any of that yet in the States.
Okay, you haven't seen it in the States.
With these kinds of interpretations. Yeah.
But there was one thing in the States that really worries me. Again, it was the ACLU, and they defended FGM on the basis of religious freedom. And now I get the religious freedom argument there, right? But yet at the same time, it's like Schrodinger's religious freedom, because at the same time they say it has nothing to do with Islam. Oh, no, that's my religious practice, right? So which one is it? There's that. Yeah. And then the trans thing. I don't know if you saw the whole thing around Maya Forrester in the UK. All right, so this is when J.K. Rowling first got involved in this. So she was, I can't remember where she works. I want to say it has something to do with biology. But she put out a tweet basically saying that, biological women are, like biological men aren't women, right? Like you cannot transition into a woman. They're like it's not possible. Like you can change your gender, not your sex, basically, type of thing, right? Mm-hmm. She got fired from her job, so it went to the courts in the UK. I don't think it was a human rights crowd. It was like regular court. The courts upheld the decision of her firing. Again, this is the UK. It's not the United States, but the ACLU defending FGM as part of religious freedom because. Okay, this goes back to cultural relativism, but I think the paper was in 2000 or 2001 called a virtuous cut, and it's from it's like a big university. I want to say Yale, but I could be wrong. But it's like Yale level university from their publications. It was I guess one of their PhD students about how attacking FGM is colonialism and that's putting white values onto people and shit like that. So I'd be like in the courts. Yeah, if you got lawyers coming out thinking this way. Eventually
discrimination against, but yeah, I think discrimination against like gender discrimination, and we could talk about maybe it was a loophole because they realized that the people who originally wrote that term sort of didn't have the foresight to realize how it would be challenged and separated from sex, and maybe they found a little loophole in there. So I'm willing to sort of fudge a little bit about that. If you fire someone on gender discrimination, and we're saying you cannot fire someone based on their gender, and and a court interprets that to be like, well, if gender means sort of self-identified, how they want to be viewed in the community, well then, yeah, okay. If somebody comes to work and says, I'm a woman today, that's my gender, and you fire them because of it, Yeah, all right. Well, then you could see a court interpreting that. If you say sex or biological sex, which is again to give you some hope, the Supreme Court just wrote that.
Yeah, I know. I saw that,
and it's solid. Like this is also the same. To bring in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the gay wedding cake case in Colorado, which again, people just tend to look at like who wins the case and who voted, and then they start celebrating. Like you got to read the opinions.
Yep.
Anyone out there who like is interested in courts, read the opinion. The whole thing is in the opinion. You could have a 9-0 opinion that you think you agree, or you vote that you think you agree with, and then you read the opinion and you're like, oh shit, like they got it wrong. Read the opinion, because in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, this is why I said there was no difference. Like if you read the Masterpiece Cake Shop case and how they wrote their opinions, this was obvious how they were going to decide this recent one with the firing. I don't know the particular name of the case. The Masterpiece Cake Shop case was a gay couple coming in asking for a wedding cake, a custom wedding cake. And this is what it all comes down to, which is actually fascinating. And the ruling, it said, the reason that the shop won that case was a free speech issue, nothing to do with discrimination. In fact, in the ruling, they said you cannot discriminate against gay people. So they already made this ruling, this new one, that you cannot deny services that you would have given to a straight couple just because they're gay. You cannot, meaning when they came in and said, can you make us a cake? The question was not, is that a service you can offer? Is that compelled speech? What they actually wrote, and the cake shop said they did this, whether they really did or not. They said, no, I can't practice my art. Yeah, I don't know if he says it. I can't practice my art because I don't believe in this kind of thing, and that's my free speech. So like I'm not going to apply my art to this, but what you can do is buy any cake that I've already made on the shelves, because that is a service that I would, that if you denied saying that you can't buy this thing that I already made on the shelf, no, like that's not asking you to do speech, that's just commerce, and you cannot deny them that cake. So they won the case the way they wanted to win. It just was a compelled speech case. So the people celebrating that, or the gay community like disparaging that decision, just didn't fucking read it. So far at the highest courts, at least in America, where let's say like there's madness happening here in the mainstream, I haven't seen the cracks appear, thankfully, on this side, which is very scary because Fox News is going to make it appear that every Democrat out there is an Antifa kid who wants to abolish the police and redefine this and that and have a million genders, and they're going to tell you like those people are going to be on the court soon. And I'm frankly, thankfully, not that worried about it. And the gender and sex thing is a particular case because of maybe that little loophole. Race is written in the Constitution and the amendments in a very obvious and specific way. Much better than like the Second Amendment with the gun one. This is a pretty obvious one. And so if they start saying things and writing opinions that start to sound like critical race theory, I'll be pretty terrified, because if we lose our trust in those institutions, we're really screwed. Trust in institutions in America is at an all-time low, but I want to give a little credit to the courts for now, for holding the line. Keep a close eye on the courts if you're worried about this stuff. Feel free to send me stuff and tell me I'm wrong. So far, they're holding.
Let me scare you here this way, right? So, the Supreme Court does not create the laws, right? Like it's the judicial branch interprets the law, and the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution. Now, amendments are there to be amended, and I know it's a really hard process. I'm not like, just change it. But now, this stuff, critical race theory, is being taught K through 12 at my last count in 16 states. Okay. A lot of universities, and I mean a lot, if you're watching them now, they're all putting in mandatory diversity trainings, which was already like before, I think it was like a day or two for students. I'm not 100% sure, but now it's like a year-long diversity course for all freshmen, and all students who are in now who haven't taken it have to take this course. So that's indoctrinating kids. If you saw the videos of the teenagers berating their parents, calling them racist, putting those videos out, New York Times runs an article or an opinion piece telling you if grandma doesn't, and they said it, if grandma doesn't support Black Lives Matter, call her a racist. Okay, so now if you've got a generation of kids brought up thinking that way, they're going to go into law. Or forget going into law and changing the court system, right? They're going to become voters, and if you get a critical mass of them, and they push their representatives to change amendments, if the Constitution's changed, the Supreme Court is only interpreting what's in front of them.
Yeah, I'm not worried. Am I worried? So yes, I am scared. Let me put that out. I am scared. You don't need to worry about scaring me about what's coming down the pipeline. And it is sort of, I'm giving sort of a endorsement for lifetime appointees or long appointees for judges because they might be a little resistant to this stuff. So maybe we just haven't seen it yet because they're all fucking old and they haven't died yet. What I'm more scared about, and you sort of hinted at it, is that we don't need an amendment to change what the word race means in the Constitution. We're just going to have a definition that becomes like, oh, that's what they said, which is then a little crazy because if you think the founders of this country who wrote that were thinking about, race in the Crenshaw, critical race, you'd be insane.
Merriam-Webster does. Merriam-Webster just changed it to the critical race definition.
Which is, how are they defining it? I mean,
I'd have to take a look, but it's racism is prejudice plus prejudice plus power. Yeah. I mean, that's how the critical race theorists do it. But I'm not 100% sure what Merriam-Webster did, but they got petitioned and they did it. So
the Constitution is written and the amendments are written in a nice particular way where they are rights based, where it's not racism is illegal, and it says that nowhere in there. It says you cannot be discriminated against or denied. I should get it right. Denied, health and happiness and pursuit of happiness based on your race. So at least they wrote it in the rights-based way, where it should be a little impervious to some of this stuff. Okay. Yeah, I'm worried about it enough. You don't need to scare me that it's coming in this direction. But let me ask you another question about maybe to give us a little more hope and stuff. I keep going back to how, and this is a really hard question to answer with the data, although it would be nice for someone to do the study. How much of what we're seeing is the normal kind of young, liberal, angsty, progressive teenager? I mean, we all were one of them at one time. But no one cared about us because we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have our consumer power was pretty low. There was other things to worry about, and most of us, what's that famous quote? Like a conservative is a liberal who got mugged by reality, or whatever. Most of us, and I've done this before. Let me do this one again. But most of us have, we think our moral ideals and our utopian sort of teenage vision of the world is real and is strong and is achievable, and we want something to fight against. There's a weird nostalgia and romanticism for the 60s and other movements where it feels like they really were fighting against the tyranny right in front of their face, and so we're always looking for that. We always want to be the hero of the world. I think this is all beautiful, natural, rite of passage as a human kind of stuff. Most of us, let's just go with someone who goes through college and, like me, becomes a filmmaker. I got a degree in film, and I always knew I was going to have to do this balance of, I can't just graduate college and then be the next Steven Spielberg. You take jobs for commercial clients, you do what you can do, you pay the bills. You have to do this balance between your, idealistic vision of your life and of yourself and the crushing practicalities of an economic capitalist system that we live in. And you're constantly playing this justification, consequentialism game in your head of a means to an end, of, all right, I'll take this one job and then I'll get the money and I'll do something good with the money. And eventually, and then let's say you start climbing that career a little bit. I mean, my early jobs were making commercials for Minute Maid and Coca-Cola. I did with stuff that everyone else was doing. And then some good ones. Every now and then you get the American Red Cross. I did an ad for them. It's cool. This is a company to believe in. But you were taking a paycheck and trying to start a life. And then, this didn't happen to me exactly, but if Philip Morris and the cigarette company comes along and was like, hey, we love your work. Let's say it happens now. You're on Instagram. We're we saw your Instagram feed. It's fucking great. We want to hire you to, do an ad for us, and we're going to pay you, six figures, $150,000, which, is a lot of money for a young 20-year-old or whatever, and not a lot for Philip Morris. And then you're faced with holy shit, do I take the job? Most of us, I don't care what you felt like you thought and you believed in when you were 17 and you had a mohawk and you were a punk rocker about your ideals. It's very attractive, and many of us, I'm sort of lucky. I could talk about my personal situation. Well, lucky and unlucky. When my dad died, there's some inheritance and stuff like that. I've always felt a little bit immune to some of those, and I feel privileged to be able to say no. That's a kind of privilege, actually, that we don't talk about enough. A privilege to be able to say no to things that disagree with your moral stance. But most people aren't, and many people aren't. And if you say yes to Philip Morris, you suddenly start to understand a little bit more of that libertarian conservative. You want to hold on to your ideals and your morals as a teenager, so you do this thing that's saying, like, I'm going to take the money, but the system itself produces the best outcome. You become a consequentialist very quickly. You leave your deontology very quickly. You become a consequentialist. So my question is to you, are we amplifying and trapping, unfortunately trapping, I'm thinking of now like the Parkland kids from the shootings, David Hogg and whoever, are we trapping, now like Greta Thunberg, whatever, are we trapping a lot of people in youth, putting them on these pedestals when they're in that moment of an amber, trapped in the amber forever of this idealism that is not very functional in the world that we have built? Maybe they're right, and we could talk about philosophically if they're right, but it's not very functional in the world, and we make them influencers, and we give them tremendous power of boycott power over news agencies or whatever, and suddenly cancel culture becomes mainstream. Like, how much of this is a genuine question, how much of this is new in people's head? I know there's a cycle here that will amplify itself. There's a feedback loop. And how much of it is that we've actually given the mantle to people who aren't, including myself when I was a teenager. Holy shit, I wouldn't want me to be running the world when I was a teenager. Like, how much of it is just we're giving too much power and influence over people who are not really mugged by reality yet? Again, they might be right, but I wish some, like me, I feel like I was mugged by reality. And now I'm in a process of discovering philosophy, of rediscovering my teenage wisdom and trying to marry it with my 20s commercialism, and now in my 30s maybe there's another process coming for me, but there you go. Like, I think there's a lot there.
Okay, no, but let's just take kids, right? Like, college students protesting, and like high school seniors or whatever. Go back to the 60s. Now, whether you agree with, okay, it was a legitimate protest against the war, they were protesting for civil rights, all good things they were protesting for. Now, I'm going to take a guess here. I don't have any facts to back this up, but they weren't the engineering student, they weren't the science students, they weren't the physics students, right? There probably were some science students in there, but for the most part, they were the history students, the philosophy students, the law students, like the humanities students, right? They're the ones who'd be learning. So, but their protests were based on free speech, on Enlightenment values, and you could show the denial of free speech. You can show the denial of equality, treating people equal. So, like, there is no segregation. There, you can show all those inequalities based on the principles that you say that the country was built on, right? If you go to the 80s, when I was in late 80s, when I was starting college and stuff like that, so we were protesting. Their kids were protesting apartheid, oil companies, this, that. Fine again. But it was then also based on facts and on enlightenment. But if you look at the videos that Benjamin Boyce and Mike Nana did from Evergreen, if you looked at the video that Mike Nana was lucky enough to catch at Sarah Lawrence, and then a few other schools, you can look at them. They're all from, it's not the whole school, right? It's if you look at Evergreen, it was the humanities, it was the arts department, and the science department didn't really know what was going on. Like, Brett Weinstein's class was still going on when he got accosted, right? That video that went out. So what are they learning? They're learning this shit. Like this crap is infected a lot of the humanities. I'm not saying every sociology teacher is doing this. I'm not saying, but it's in the air. It's in the water. It's so. The kids all said, you taught us how to do this. Sarah Lawrence, they said the same thing. There's a school in New York City that they did this, I think it was Vice or whatever, praising them, and the elementary school, and they're talking about, we're not educating the kids, we're teaching them how to be activists. You don't teach K through 12 how to be activists. So there is a problem there. Like, kids being kids and protesting and fighting the man, that's punk.
Well, so I mean, I think we're sort of agreeing there. Of like, we can blame like the theory and the pseudo academics for fueling this fire, but plus social media is a huge deal, and plus the just like insane media, and plus that a lot of the problems in the 60s were addressed. It's hard to figure out what to protest against these days, but kids feel like they need to protest against something, and I think that's fine, because the world is not perfect, and we should always be fighting for a more perfect world and a more perfect thing. I don't know. I mean, I was thinking as you were answering that, if you had a time machine and you brought a bunch of those kids from the 60s, if they would be totally at odds with the evergreen kids now, they might fall in line. They might be very quick to sort of. I
don't think so. I think no, because yes, there was the postmodernism in the 60s. You had, the Frankfurt School starting up in the 30s, whatever. You had that, neo-Marxism, and you had that stuff in the 60s as well. But you also had a lot of very principled people talking about free speech, and embracing the Enlightenment.
Well, what you had, I mean, to your point, and this is actually this is a big point. This is probably the same point. I think what you're missing here is, I don't think the kids are all that different now, and I honestly don't even think, like, having the academic theory gives them a lot of, like, bullets in their guns, which is fucking crazy, and I agree with you. But I think the emotions of the kids, I don't think, are that different. What's missing here are leaders. And when we keep talking about the 60s, and you're talking about free speech and people advocating for this or that or whatever, we're thinking of Martin Luther King. We're thinking of the people leading the speeches. We're thinking even of protest music. We're thinking of Bob Dylan. We're thinking of these things. We have none of that now. This is a leaderless movement. And so I think that element, and why it's a leaderless movement, is, I think, because social media, everybody's trying to be the leader, and everybody can be. There are no moral voices reining in the crazies of it. I'm sure there was revolutionaries who were crazy, and Marxists and communists who were marching with Martin Luther King, but you didn't really hear about them because we didn't have that many cameras around.
No. And
you pointed them at the guy who was leading it, and he said the speech, and you had people talking to him, and he was sort of leading it, and I'm sure people disagreed, and they sort of fell in line. The Malcolm X story with it, I think is a really interesting and fascinating. When you saw me posting some stuff, worrying the tragedy that Malcolm X was killed in the middle of clearly what was an intellectual maturity for him in a process, and he never got to do it, is really something to talk about and something we should get into. But I think what might really be behind that is the leaderlessness of it. I think fueling a movement or a poster or a Black Lives Matter or this or that or whatever is problematic, of course, because you don't know what you're signing up for. If grandma answered the question, I don't know if I support the movement, what is it? How would the grandchild even answer? This is that whole awful scene. You know what I'm thinking of the mayor of Minneapolis, where the woman was, I don't know who she was, but organically became the voice of that little mob and said something like, will you defund the police? And clearly his first question was like, what do you mean? And then she said, we don't want no police. And he's like, well, again, you can't hear him, but he's like, well, if that's your definition, no, I'm not going to abolish the police. And then it was suddenly a mob and booing him or whatever. And nobody corrected her. Nobody thoughtful was standing there being like, this is what we mean. Because you and I both know, if it's like, oh, you know what, that's a slogan we have, what we mean, Martin Luther King would have done this. He would have said something like, we need to rethink policing in this country, and like we need community programs, and we need things for the kids to do after school, and we want to redirect funds, and blah. And the mayor would have said, cool, I'm on board, and everybody would have cheered. Because he was. Literally the next day, he signed up for the much more palatable version of defund the police, which is rethink where the funding goes and push back against the police unions that have too much power, et cetera. Great, we need to do all that stuff. But I think it would be nice if we had leaders of this movement. I don't know how leaders organically come out of movements anymore. I can't even remember the last one, and where it might come from. And who's failing here? But
that's again part of their mentality, right? Like if you look at the Occupy thing, that was rudderless.
Yeah,
That's why it just completely fell apart. They didn't have one cohesive goal. They had, you don't raise your hand, you snap your fingers. I mean, like those are little stupid rules that you can make fun of, right? That's just the window dressing. But there was no.
So here's. What you said there, though, is what I also worry about. Do you know Ross? What's his name? I can never pronounce his last name. Douthat Ross. He's a philosopher. He's written a few books. He's Catholic. I was listening with my girlfriend actually on a drive down here. I'm in Florida. For anybody listening on a rescue mission, they bring my mom back up to the safety zone from coronavirus. But we were listening to his conversation with Ezra Klein. It was sort of interesting. But I guess he's written a book, and I haven't read it, all about the decadent society. And when you bring up the thing about a specific goal, we talk about this a lot. Like, what's the goal of this movement? Is there a specific goal here? this is going to loop back to the other deeper philosophical things we were talking about earlier. And in the 60s, if it felt like the goal here, let's talk about Vietnam, was end the war in Vietnam. It was like you can define this will be a successful movement when the troops from the U.S. come home. And by that measure, then they succeeded, and they feel like they did the right thing, like you're saying, enacted their free speech, put the right pressures on, got the troops home, success, everyone went home and had kids in the suburbs. Then the civil rights movement, if Martin Luther King, let's even go back further, like the women's suffrage movement. It's very clear. It's like, we want the vote. When we get the vote, we will have succeeded. The earlier move, then the blacks getting the vote with Frederick Douglass leading a lot of that charge. When we get the vote, we have won. So it's like looking back in history, it's sort of like you can collapse the whole movement to a specific thing they were fighting for, and then they got it or they didn't get it, and that's the story of history. And now, I don't think they can find a specific thing to ask for, because the thing that they want to ask for is so amorphous and is so deep and goes back to the things but I'm not even blaming them, because I don't know what they should ask for. If you're asking me if you want one thing to ask for, it's end the war on drugs. But they don't want to do something so specific, because I think if there's like a complaint box for the universe or for countries or nations or society, it's stuffed right now with a million different things that you could kind of tie together to just this, and this is the decadent society kind of thing, with this general kind of like, is this all there is? Is this as good as we can do? Why is it still unequal outcomes? It's almost a religious kind of decadent society of when a lot of things are, when Steven Pinker's graphs are going in the right direction, but you still feel a little unsatisfied. And we could talk about, why I love philosophers like Hannah Arendt, and not anti-Enlightenment philosophers, but counter-Enlightenment philosophers who wanted to question and criticize the meaning-making apparatuses or the meaning-squashing apparatuses of things like capitalism. I think those kinds of things they're so amorphous and they're so deep, but they're so spiritual in a way and cosmic that people are struggling with, and you don't know what to fight against. What are you going to ask for? Is it like, I know, but what are you going to ask for? Give me meaning in my life? I can't put that on a sign, but in some deep way, that's, I think, what we're after here.
But I mean, okay.
I employed Chloe Valdery for a conversation with black athletes, which was really fun to produce, and she did great. And she has this school called the Theory of Enchantment.
Yeah, she's awesome.
And it's a lot about like getting to this level of analysis of how do we, and this is going to go maybe to the very deep, but when we were talking earlier about why they are afraid of science as a method for very obvious reasons, because the beast that is in the bottom of every conversation and every spreadsheet here is the beast of trying to get those two things to agree. All men are created equal, but all men are not, do not have equal abilities. How do you get them to agree? That's the beast. And atheism, true atheism, science as a way to get to it is, and philosophy, let's say it, is the way to try to contend with that. And they've rejected it for a religious notion. And I sympathize with that, but that's the big monster underneath all of this. That's the level that I want to address with.
Can I offer you something for all men are created equal? Instead of saying all men are created equal, which it's all men are created with equal worth. So yes,
that's great.
Okay.
I think that's what it means.
Okay. But so if you add that, one word, and then you could show like, okay, yes, just because you are born, paraplegic doesn't mean you don't have the same intrinsic worth. Like, yes, you won't be able to run a marathon, right, but you might design the next super collider, right? There's worth there. So I think, obviously we can't go back and ask Franklin, but I think that's kind of what he meant was, you are created with, equal potential, no, not even potential. I don't even want to say that, because that puts, I'm not equal to, Usain Bolt, like not at all. Right. But the value of your life is equal to the value of everyone else's life. And then no one should impede you from trying to live out your dreams. But obviously it has to be within reason. Like I said, I'm never going to run as fast as Usain Bolt, and I can do whatever I want unless, I become the $6 million man, right? Get some bionic legs in me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other word in the sentence that's really important is created, because it implies sort of step one or moment one of a life, and there is this immediate and eternal, let's call it infinite value to this thing called experience and thing called life that is imbued in the thing, but it's created, and it's just the start, which will not get you equality of outcome,
No.
but it gets you equality of opportunity and starting point, which we also do not have. I mean, the Occupy thing is such an unfortunate failure, because I remember I was a little younger and I would go to it. I was observing it. I wasn't a part of it. The energy was right. And the conversation about inequality in particular, a lot of it was expressed in income at that point, or just wealth creation, not money, but wealth concentration was right. And we actually, that movement failed hard. Like, it got worse, much worse, since the Occupy movement. And I feel like that's also frustrating. I mean, yeah, the parallels between what's happening now and what happened with Occupy are understated. They should be mentioned much, much more. It's the same kind of angsty energy of like, great, you're right, this is fucked up. What are we going to fix? And they're like, we don't know, and we don't know where to start, which is why having a leader would be incredible. Like, I don't know who could get up there right now in the Black Lives Matter movement and be that leader. I don't see anybody rising to that podium. But if it was someone who could say, like, this is all right. Like, this racism thing is a problem. Racism is real, and we're still dealing with it. And I hear that you're hurting out there. Where are we going to start? Let's start here. War on drugs, or this and that, or whatever. Like, there's a million places to start, and I don't think they know where to start. And I don't think they're going to get anywhere. And they might. This is the danger. They're going to make a huge mess, and unfortunately, I think it's a huge mess that's going to hurt themselves more than anything else. And the data could help you figure out where to start. You could do the kind of a data analysis if you want to start somewhere. Okay. But here's the other thing, before you answer, because there's another psychological and philosophical thing that we're dancing around here, is of the notion of the victimhood narrative and needing a problem to solve as a human. And the fear, and this has always also been the problem with the reparations conversation, is what happens the next day? If we do it, does that mean the victimhood narrative is now erased and you can and we're good? It doesn't seem that way. When your identity, and this ties into a lot of things he said, when your identity is completely intertwined and defined with and by a victimhood narrative, that's where you're actually deriving your meaning from in the universe, is being a victim of a system. That's a very scary and dangerous place to be, because then what happens when you solve it? You've lost all the meaning in your life. Like, if you need a victimhood narrative in order to get meaning out of the world, then we've made a huge mistake. And the problem is not the problem. The philosophical truth is, on some cosmic level, we are all victims of being in a universe which we did not ask to be in, that is very confusing and very chaotic and very scary and very weird and very beautiful and very a lot of things. And that should be a kind of universal victimhood narrative that actually binds us together. That would be like a super myth that actually would get behind. That, it's a victimhood narrative with only but opportunity to solve against it. And that's sort of the deep fighting against God and redefining the world we want to live in. But just on a smaller national micro level, if your entire existence is based on being a victim of a problem, then you will not solve that problem, and you are disincentivized from solving that problem. So this is the disingenuousness. Do we really think the Black Lives Matter movement wants to solve the problem of racism? Because if they actually do, then what is there left to fight for? And this is a very hard philosophical and psychological problem to contend with.
Like the leaderless thing, I don't know who could come up, and I don't know who they would accept, because, again, part of their thing is it's, your personal narrative is what's right. And so if your leader gets up and they don't say exactly what you want, I mean, it was Slate, so take it for what you will. Was it last year? They wrote an article panning Robin DiAngelo, saying she's using her whiteness to promote herself through white fragility, blah, 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 and it doesn't do enough, right? So, like, who's going to be the leader there? But when you bring up the drug thing, okay, like, just take the drug war for a second. Oh, there's, too much policing because they're being racist against black people. okay, go back to the crack days of the 80s, and I know the drug war predates that, but that's when it really, Nancy Reagan, just say no, all that stuff that started.
Mm-hmm.
You had black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs,
Mm-hmm.
Democrats begging for more policing, because I'm not saying that's the right way to deal with drugs. Maybe that's the right way to deal with the gangs. It shouldn't have been policing for drugs. It should be healthcare or other things along those lines, psychological, whatever, right? It's more of a health issue than it is a policing issue. Gangs is a policing issue. But like all this stuff came in because people were asking, because you were looking at the wrong thing. It's like, okay, we'll stop drugs by stopping the gangs, but you're stopping gangs, you're not stopping drugs. You're looking at the secondary issue. I'm not saying gangs is not a big thing. Like you didn't like I remember all the Bloods and the Crips and all that. Then you had the white supremacist blowback to that in the early 90s, and that's where you get like American History X and all that like that. But so you had all that stuff come out. But
well, if they deny science,
but that's just it. Like the system, if you ask them what's the system you want to break down, it's the whole system that we have. It's the Enlightenment. Yeah. So that's the system. Yeah. So if that's their demand, that's where are you going to go with that? Like there was a conference in Johannesburg, 2016, Science Must Fall. Yeah. It was the philosophy department against the science department. At one point, one of the people in the philosophy department said, "Why do we need this European science? Our shaman can call lightning down on people."
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Like what am I going to argue with there?
Zeus-ish, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so if that's what they want, then no. Again, I support Black Lives Matter as a statement. Like, yes, Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not going to, policing needs. Yeah, policing needs.
Yeah, like maybe I'm too charitable, but I don't. They can say they want that. I don't think they want that. I mean, I don't think they'll like that if they get that. Obviously,
I mean, they won't. But
yeah, they won't, because you can't do anything. You can't solve any problems if you actually deny science. If we're saying science and philosophy, and let's say rejections of authoritarian, exclusive claims to knowledge or whatever is generally the Enlightenment. You won't solve any problems if you can't find reality, and science is our way to find reality. But as a counter Enlightenment philosopher fan that I am, what I think they want is meaning, and what they want to bring down is a system where they feel like they don't have any place in it, and they don't get any meaning out of it in the way they want. And then the danger is fueling that of course, the victimhood narratives, that if your meaning is being a victim, this is not going to go well. But I want to give, maybe to step back away from the woke kids, who are obviously just plainly a problem, and we both agree with that. But if there were some kind of interesting and good movement in a response to, like you're saying, the Enlightenment or science, it's that science and the Enlightenment has failed to deliver maybe the kind of meaningful life that a lot of people are after. Certainly in the economic sphere, if all we're saying is that at its most benign, the Enlightenment should have been and is a way to clear the way for people to find their own meaning. Meaning, we're going to be really good about getting you fed and getting houses for everybody using this system of free markets and whatever else. But then it's up to you to find life. I think that's fine, and it's done incredibly well there, but unequally. It's not distributed the way it ought to be, and we need to work on the inequality of just that, although it's getting better everywhere, as we know. But then what, is that it? Is like, well, if it's up to me, how can I get from here to a meaningful life? Even if everything's very comfortable around me, is that it? And people are, again, this is sort of like the theory of enchantment stuff, but people are looking for those answers and deciding that the system itself is blocking them from finding those answers in some real way that they think if they can take it down, then suddenly, I don't know, everything will be fine. It's an anti-Enlightenment movement. It's a counter-Enlightenment philosophy that should be fueling it, which is about fixing it, which is about not becoming Sayyid Qutb. Let's talk about Sayyid Qutb, who started the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He comes to America. Yeah, go on. I mean, if people don't know the story, the short version is he comes to Colorado expecting to find sort of a beautiful life. It doesn't. This beautiful utopian. Doesn't. Decides this is all debauchery and this meaningless vapidness in American capitalism, and decides then as a anti-enlightenment that Islam must be the answers and squashes all of that. It's hard to, and the outcome that you see today
is the Taliban and ISIS.
Yes, is the so that's what the fear. And I agree with you. I don't think. Hopefully, we don't see a Taliban here of woke kids, but that's the same problem that we're dealing with. Yeah.
Okay, I have a different worry about that. But okay, so this leadership, this like lack of meaning. Okay,
yeah.
So here's the thing. After, if you want to, I don't believe in the 1619 thing, but so after the American Revolution, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the Constitution and the idea that was America was to build a country based on the Enlightenment, right? Like they took the British and the French Enlightenment and they merged it, and Paine and Jefferson, all that, and they came up with an American Enlightenment. And if that's the story that you want to give, that's the meaning that you want to give people, like that you're not held together by your belief in God. You're not held together by your country you come from. This ideal that everyone is created with equal worth. Everyone has a right to voice their opinions. You don't, like that's the story that should have been sold. Now, so fine, that was sold to white people. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it wasn't sold to the slaves, and it still wasn't sold to the slaves after the Civil War. Like I can't remember who it was. There were 3 states that still had slavery after the Civil War, and they were northern states. It was Maryland, Delaware, and I'm trying to remember. And it took an act of Congress to get those slavery taken away there, right? So, then you look at the slave, the anti-slave laws, like the anti-black laws and Jim Crow and all that stuff. So that story wasn't given to black people, right? It might have been given to immigrants. It might have been given to a black family from Nigeria once they got here, but black people who lived here historically, that really wasn't, like, they were told it, but they weren't shown it. It was like Ho Chi Minh, the French, fraternity, fraternité, liberté, égalité, like, fraternity, liberty, and equality. The Indochina, like the Vietnamese and the Korean, like, in Indochina, they didn't see that. In Algeria, they didn't see that, right? They were treated as something different. So they took those ideas and whatever, Ho Chi Minh and what happened in Algeria was wrong, but like you can go on and that stuff. But like I said, the kids here weren't. But then I think, again, if you go back to around the late 90s, people were starting to see, in the 90s when you were getting like the first generation or the first real generation of black millionaires who were actually complaining about the estate tax, right? Mm-hmm. You never had that happen before. So like, things were getting better. And then there's that, like, I use this, this is cliche and I used it, like the African proverb there, the child who's not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Mm. Since the 90s, like, this stuff has been in colleges. In 2012, Coleman Hughes, like, I heard him, Coleman, like, I heard him talking with, I can't remember who he was talking with, but he said, in 2012, he was introduced to intersectionality in high school. So, so you've got a generation of kids who've been told that either A, that the village does not love them and is doing everything it can to kill them, and then another set of kids told me, you're the reason why those kids are like that, and it's your fault. Like that, mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw that picture of that young girl in the UK. I think she looked about 5 or 6, and she's holding up a sign. It says "privilege," pointing up towards her, and the look on her face is so horrific. Like, I don't know what her mother told her or her father told her to hold that sign up. But that kid looked like she was ready to break down and cry, and that could have been straight out of Jesus camp.
Yeah.
Okay, like there was another one. There's a little black girl. She's maybe 9 years old. She's bawling her eyes out that she's going to get killed because of the color of her skin. It's like, okay, well, like you said, the data. Let's look at the data. Then if you're going to get killed, it's more than likely going to be by someone with the same color of skin as you.
Yeah, right? Of course. Yeah.
So like the media and education, and I'm a big fan of education. I'm a big fan of a good media, like informative media. But if that's what they're doing, then there's a huge problem here. Like, you can't. Now again, like I said, this is K through 12. I brought up the Crips and the Bloods and the Skinheads, and like, who do they go after? The disenfranchised. Who does ISIS go after? Like they go after the loner kids, the ones who are feeling marginalized, the ones that are feeling put upon. Mm-hmm. And you're creating a generation that's going to feel like either you're the cause of them or you've been punished by them. I mean, one last little thing. Like a friend of Faisal's, I think you know him as well, like Mookie.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read his article in Medium like earlier this year. Okay, it was earlier this year, it was late last year. He was talking about his kids. And they came home and they were complaining that they wish they weren't half white.
Oh, God.
Okay, that's not a good thing.
No.
Okay, so that, like, like, what do they want? And they're being told to want the wrong thing. They're being told what they want, not being taught how to decide for themselves what they want. And that's a huge problem.
Yeah, well, it's indoctrination for sure. I mean, they might succeed in burning it down one day, and I think like we will. It'll be a shame, and I think they'll reinvent it in the same way. It's hard to imagine different structures, like abolishing the police and then realizing you need to call someone when there's a problem, and then you need to trust someone and you need to arm them because we have guns here. Like it's like, I think there was a South Park about this where like they get rid of like government or something at the beginning of the episode, but at the end they're like, I have an idea, let's all elect someone, and like anyway they reinvent government. Like some of these systems feel like inevitable natural systems that they'll reinvent. I do wonder. I mean, I wonder. I don't know what. There's some things that they say are true that come out of critical race theory and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know what it's like to be a black person in this country. I have no idea. And I wonder what it's like. I think John McWhorter said this actually in a conversation with Cornel West, which was about reparations. And he had a really beautiful line because he's so lovely with language. And he said something like, it would be nice to feel whole. And this was about reparations. This is John McWhorter, who's not a fan of classic reparations, as you know, and has a head on his shoulders. And it was a great line that stuck with me that somehow, because he's so good at it, like brought me in for a moment to try to understand his experience as a black man in this country and all that. It would be nice to feel whole. And I probably give too much credit. I totally agree with you on all of these ridiculous theories and outcomes. You're spending more time sort of like with the James Lindsay, like understanding the theory than I do. I'm like, I don't even want to look at it because I trust that it's insane. And every now and then I peek under the hood and I'm like, okay, yeah, someone else look at that. I've got other things to do. But I'm always trying to get under of like, what are they attracted to? What's really going on here? And, I don't know what it's like to be, let's try this. We're both sort of fans of superhero movies or cartoons and that kind of mythology and stuff. And I'm trying to have a conversation about Black Panther. I've been struggling to write an article about Black Panther for 4 years now since it came out, because it struck me so obviously about what it was. I don't think it was a tremendous superhero movie, but I thought it was something that happened in it with the two characters. There's going to be spoiler alerts all throughout this if nobody's seen it, but it felt so familiar as the superhero arc. Actually, let's talk about X-Men first, because it's not about race in particular. The origin story of X-Men, if you know it or don't know it, is Professor X and Magneto are sort of the two forces of the villain and the mastermind of the good guys. The X-Men is Professor X, Xavier, and the bad guy is Magneto. By the end, he's a bad guy, but he's a complicated bad guy because it's written well. And it's sort of about what every superhero and villain dichotomy and balance is about. It always resurfaces of this good versus evil, but it always, at the beginning, the origin story of Magneto is he's a Jewish kid. I won't get his name right. You might know it. He was a Jewish kid in Auschwitz. I think it was Auschwitz or the Warsaw Ghetto, whatever it was. He was being terrorized and grew up in the Warsaw Ghetto or somewhere in Nazi Europe as it was rising. And he discovers his power for the very first time. His power, it turns out, is bending metal with magnetism with his mind and with his hands, and also he has telepathy. But while he's like being ushered into these like Nazi sort of like, I think they're getting on trains. I don't know how it was in the original book, but they're being ushered away and obviously being taken away clearly to their deaths. And there's all this trepidation that they know what's about to happen. And he's with his mom. And then at some point, some of the Nazis start to split. I think it's the men and the women, and the mom is being pulled away. And Magneto is a young boy at the time, like a young teenager. And he starts freaking out because he's being separated from his family. Of course, this is fucking terrible. And he starts crying and yelling, and all these Nazi guards come over to hold him. And she's being separated from him in this other line. And there's like a metal gate between them. And he's crying and screaming, and he's reaching, and his hand is going out, and the metal starts to bend of this gate that he's not even near, and it's this insane power that's like morphing, and he's like, now there's like 6 Nazi guards holding him in place when he's discovering this power. But eventually one of them, I think, smashes his head with a butt of a gun, and he collapses and passes out, and then he falls, and the magnetism is released, and his mom is taken away. So his origin story is fucking terrible. A victim, right? An actual victim of the ugliest unleashing of human prejudice and racism and tribalism and horror that we're capable of, and he saw that. Professor X, meanwhile, is a boy named Xavier who grows up in Westchester, New York, in a very fancy house, and he's very privileged. He's a white boy, and grows up in this way, and also realizes that he's a mutant in this world and has telepathy and is very strong. But he realizes the humans of this world are not a fan of mutants, and they want to get rid of mutants, and they're all sort of facing racism. So they're both a maligned group of mutants, and you've got one Professor X who grew up with this sort of privileged life, and one Magneto who grew up seeing horrible acts of humans. And Professor X decides he needs to save humanity and teach them out of their terrible ways or whatever, and they're worth saving, even though they constantly kind of hate mutants and do these terrible things. He believes they're worth saving, and he gathers all these mutants together to try to save them and teach them things and rescue the world, while Magneto, for a little bit, flirts with that, but constantly sees the ugliness in humans and decides, fuck it, we're going to burn them down, and we're going to crush them, and the mutants are going to take over. And you have this beautiful philosophical, baseline at the bottom is this worth saving? Is what we're doing worth saving? You also see the same kind of superhero villain interaction with like Joker and Batman. And then I'll do this quickly, I know, but in Black Panther, the same thing happens in a very obvious way with race, where there's two brothers who get separated when they're kids, one who grows up to become Killmonger in Oakland, and the other one goes back to Wakanda as the rightful T'Challa, I think his name is in the story, as the rightful prince and king of Wakanda, and sort of becomes the Professor X, as it were. Well, the kid who gets left in Oakland grows up seeing genuinely crappy conditions and plenty of racism and plenty of inequality and police brutality and whatever else. And we could talk about whether that was fair or exaggerated, but certainly saw rough things and dark sides of humanity, where the prince of Wakanda sees kind of this amazing life and has this sort of privileged thing. And they grow up, and of course Killmonger realizes he's probably the rightful heir to the throne as the brother, and comes back to Wakanda to rule. And they have this power, just like the mutants and X-Men, they have the superpower of all of this amazing technology they have. And Killmonger basically decides, these humans who wronged me so much are not worth it. We're going to burn them all down and kind of take over and use these weapons to tear shit up. While T'Challa, the Black Panther character, is very much the Professor X of no, they're worth saving. And it's a sort of really fascinating international relations movie about maybe joining the world and using our technology for good and helping everybody. And in the end, again, spoiler alert, in the end, to win that film, that movie ends with Killmonger realizing that he has to die in order for this thing to actually succeed. And he does. I'm again ruining it here, but Black Panther has to kill him in order to try to enter the world without burning it down in this way. And when I remember watching that movie in the theater, and my jaw was on the floor, being like, I was the only white guy in the theater. I didn't see it when it first came out. It was a few other black families and black kids, and I was looking around, being like, this is sort of an amazing political message. Very much to me, the Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X conversation happening again on that screen. Malcolm X was very violent, literally praising God for plane crashes early in his career that killed white people, like crazy Killmonger kind of stuff, and also saw terrible conditions growing up. So that movie now, I don't know how it was missed or why it wasn't talked about enough. I failed to write about this because I just didn't know how to do it. I want to still have a conversation about it with people. But seems to be the same classic superhero conversation of, you've seen bad things, you are a victim in some ways, and people are capable of terrible things. Are you going to love them and try to help them, or are you going to burn it all down and hate them? And it seems to me there's so much hate and resentment, maybe rightfully so in some way, that I wrote about in my article, like this general, what it's like to be a black man in a country that brought you and not you, but your ancestors here by force. There's anger there that analogizes itself to Killmonger, and we could give into that. They could give into that in the movement and burn it all down. And it seems like that is winning the conversation right now over Black Panther, which is like, you have to, it might be justifiable, but we have to kill that part of ourselves in order to really enter the world and do good. And I'm not saying it's easy. I don't know if, to add one more thing, I don't know if you saw that viral video that went around of the 3 black men in the middle of the protest when they first started, of 3 generations. One was like a 45-year-old man, one was like a 31-year-old, and one, it was this kind of amazing moment. Someone just filmed it on their cell phone. If nobody's seen it, you should look it up. It's sort of beautiful. 45-year-old dude, he's like wearing a wife beater, and he looks fucking pissed. He's like angry, he's yelling, like, let's go in there. I think they want to like loot something or do some violence. The 31-year-old dude is sort of in the middle, trying to calm him down, being like, don't do it, like, we can't be angry like this. And then he pulls in this kid, like from off the screen, who is also young, very tall, like teenage black boy. And he says, like, look at him, he's 16. And it's very emotional.
Yeah, I've seen this one, yeah.
You've seen it, yeah. And he says, like, we need to do better. And he's looking at the kid being like, you don't want to be me in 15 years, and you don't want to be him in 20 years or 30 years, or whatever, however old the guy was. Like, you need to figure something out and do better. And this is the challenge of, like, holy shit, that's sort of Killmonger. And, like, you hope this kid is Black Panther and not Killmonger. But I am with you that we are fueling that generation with a bunch of very dangerous philosophy and fraudulent academic crap that seems to be rooting for him to be Killmonger, which is so damn wrong. And like you're saying, a crime to him, the kid holding the sign, like how are we missing it that bad? How are we missing the lessons that are all around us throughout history of, like, no, don't be Joker, be Batman. No, don't be Magneto, be Professor X. No, don't be Killmonger, be Black Panther, which is a lovely, empowering, amazing thing that you're allowed to keep your identity and your pride and everything, but don't burn it down, even though slavery happened, even though the war on drugs is bullshit, even though there's been redlining. Don't burn it down. Help us fix it. And you could be a part of that conversation. And it's I don't know. I mean, it's
no, but it is depressing.
We need Black Panther to be our leader. I gave the answer. A fictional character.
But it is depressing, right? Like, it's.
Do you want to hear what's depressing about that? One more thing before I am going to let you answer it. But Stan Lee wrote that, of course, a white man. Yeah. So already there is, like, well, that's a white version of sort of the way you should interact with the world, which scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, but that's what it is, right? Like, okay, wanting to tear down. Okay, the Emancipation statue, in Lincoln Park in D.C. They want to tear that down, right? There's a congresswoman who wants to pass legislation to have it torn down.
Eesh.
Okay, now, people are like always paid for by slaves. I'll give you my best critical race theory objection to that. Okay, and
okay, try it. Yeah.
Like, whatever, you can run it by James Lindsay or something, or you can run it by a critical race theorist to see how right I am on this. The slaves were taught to obey their masters and to please their masters. Right? That's what the slaves knew. 1619 to 1865 or whatever, right? That's what they knew. And they were only taught that, so that's all they know. That's the world they know. That's what this world wants. So by collecting money to raise this statue, they're showing love for their white masters, because they're showing their masters that they're appreciated, that they were, quote unquote, set free. And so that statue is just a perpetuation of whiteness, because it's black people agreeing that this was, they're still being subservient. They're still thanking. And, look at Lincoln's got his hand over this black man, and this black man's kneeling down. But it's like, okay, but he's looking up, and he's got broken chains. I mean, whatever, right? Like, there's a plausible critical race explanation for why that statue is racist and why it perpetuates whiteness, and why it's anti-black and it needs to be taken down, because the slaves who did it, that's the thinking that they have. I mean, this stuff is so ridiculous. If you have a panel and you want to say, okay, we need a diverse panel. So you have one panel with 50 people, every demographic you can think of, right? And one straight white male, or one straight white person, forget even male. The other panel is all black, 50 black people. The all black will be more diverse, because they say white people are... Everyone thinks white people are superior, so they will hold themselves subservient. If you have one white person on that panel, everyone will start thinking white. I mean, it's so fucking insulting. That's insulting to me. It's insulting to everyone on that panel. It's like saying you have no mind of your own. Like this thing of, like, science is a white way of knowing. Like, reason is a white way of knowing. Like, no, come on. Next time you call Microsoft and get help from Dave that sounds a lot like Raj from The Big Bang Theory, think about that. And like, so... The stuff is, I mean, it's...
Well, do you think it'll pass? I agree with you. Obviously,
I don't know. I mean, it's been around for... it's been around
It's a movement of resentment. It is the Killmonger resentment. He had to die in that movie to get past it.
Okay, but
I mean, do you think the good guys will win?
I mean, right now, like I don't see the academy lasting. I do not see universities lasting. Like there's a guy at UBC who, Yasmin shared this with me. She saw it. He had to quit because of liking the wrong tweets. Not even tweeting anything. Not even retweeting. Liking the wrong tweets. Like
yeah. No,
it's getting out of hand. And okay, you were talking about don't burn it all down. I keep thinking of Weimar Germany. Like you mentioned Hannah Arendt. Read up Hannah Arendt. Like, I mean, like this is how Weimar Germany started. This is how Weimar Germany ended, I should say, not started, but this is what happened with the fascists in Spain. You had Antifa coming up.
Yeah.
Gaining, and then they were the ones who were causing the violence. They were the one who instigated the violence, and then the fascists got sympathy. And we all know how that turns out. Like
I agree. I also I'm wondering what you think about solutions, because we obviously agree on how just ugly and dangerous and influential these shitty theories are. I am also probably like you, getting tired of people dismissing it as fringy college stuff. No, I'm not calling out any names in particular, but companies that I know are sending out emails that are pretty much demanding loyalty oaths. I mean, it's not contained to Portland or Seattle, really. And yes, it's a problem. But as far as solutions go, because I wonder, you brought up Hannah Arendt, and she writes, I love her work, and she writes a ton about the meaning stuff I was talking about. And I won't go through her whole theory in the human condition, but it breaks down labor versus work versus action as sort of ways of being in the world. She hammers Marx in a very nice way that shows he was so right about assessing the problem and then so dreadfully wrong about solving it. Was really interesting. But the term that gets attached to a lot is the economic man. That we have redefined ourselves as the economic animal, that your worth and your place in the world is finding your place in this economic system. So she deals a lot with these meaning problems. But sticking with the economic problem, as far as solutions today and practical solutions, if you and I are both committed to science and honest data interpretation, and we keep hitting that rock saying, you know what, ideas in people's heads really fucking matter. And we don't know how to solve that one directly because it's too volatile for people. We could talk about it. I can make movies with Sam Harris. You could do your work, and we'll keep reforming religion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, do what we can. But you know what a huge causal factor is for something like inequality of outcome, or even why there is a disparity in police shootings with race breakdowns, is poverty and education. And so we say, hey, let's try to intervene there. And we say, income inequality is out of control. Wealth inequality is out of control. Let's do UBI. Let's give people fucking money, not welfare, because there's a taboo attached to it. And I'm rather convinced by removing the stain of being on the government dole or whatever is a huge benefit to UBI. Let's give UBI. Would that help people be less attracted? These ideas aren't going to go away, but will they be less attracted to a eternal victimhood religious narrative of something like critical race theory or any of these critical theories that we see? Will they be less attracted to it with a more equal economic playing field? I love that solution as a solvent that solves a lot, addresses a lot, and I see that one.
But here's the thing: I have a worry. Okay, there's no quick, easy fix, and it's going to take a generation because
absolutely.
It took 25 years to get to this point, and you can talk about the stuff that predated critical race theory and intersectionality and all that, but it took us 25 years to get to this point. First of all, the academy should look at itself and say, you know what, because and I don't want to shit on schools or whatever, but they've caused a huge problem here. But physics majors weren't going to go to the English department to tell them how to do English, and they weren't expecting the English department to come and tell them how to do physics, right? Mm-hmm. You had that, the academy made itself little niches and people stuck in their niches. So when the critical race theorists and all this stuff came out, oh, well, these people are PhDs in race, and there might be issues of racism in the school, and so if you're an academic, you understand that they've got a PhD in race, like Brett Weinstein's idea of ideal laundering, like, so through that process, they've got, pedigree now.
Yeah.
So they become an administrator in the school. Now, it's not the English department now coming to the physics department. It's the diversity and inclusion office saying, oh, there's a problem with diversity and inclusion in physics. Okay.
Yeah.
They're not addressing the physics. They're addressing, a societal problem, and they've got the pedigree to fix it. So the physics department might listen to them. And then you have a paper that came out earlier this year talking about light supremacy in physics, how light supremacy is white supremacy. Okay.
As in, like, the study of light.
Yeah, exactly. But this is from a person studying physics.
Yeah.
There is a problem here. So the academy has to, I think Jonathan Haidt's right. It's either, are you there for the truth or are you there for social justice? If you're there for the truth, we have an established set of how we determine what is as close as possible to the objective truth that you can get, right? Like, science doesn't say it's going to give you the objective truth. It says it's going to give you as close an approximation as it can, and it's something that we can all share. Whereas the theorists...
and then it's up to you. Like, I keep on reinforcing that science doesn't give you the answers.
No,
ever.
It's up to you.
It just points you in the right direction of, like, oh, here's where the thing might be the causal relationship. Yeah. If you want the outcome to be different, intervene here. Here's where the thing is. And and so they might say, like, oh, we're doing that. The thing we want to change is perfectly, proportional boardrooms or something to the population.
Exactly.
And that's why it's a science denial, because that just, do you want perfectly proportional, in my article as well, do you want perfectly proportional outcomes of gender or sex, however you say it, for kindergarten or elementary school teachers, which is 89% women in America? Do you want that? Because if you are, well, fix that one too, because that one apparently is way off. And so, but it's not, which is why we know it's not an honest movement. It's not an honest. No. And so we're stuck with saying, are they actually stupid, or are they actually just activist and full of resentment? They're full of resentment. Again, this goes to the superhero thing. Resentment is why Killmonger was the bad guy. Resentment is why Magneto, because he couldn't get over it. I'm going to give a pitch for, if I can. I know I'm leaning on Chloe here, but the notion of forgiveness needs to be talked about quite interestingly here, and seeing, and what it's morphed into is not forgiveness but apologies. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it, but it's all performative, right? Again, in this, like a
seance.
Yeah, really. but it's, I've seen people we know in both respect. I don't want to put out names or whatever, because not because of them, but someone else might. But they were told that, okay, blah blah blah. I went to the protests in Washington D.C. I haven't had a chance to, because they're a bit of a public figure, and I haven't a chance to put out a statement about this. They're like, oh, going to the protest doesn't matter. Only putting out a statement matters. Okay, so this person has spent 2 days at the protests in Washington, D.C., so they were actually out there doing something, and they didn't have a chance to make a statement, and then they were being told that what they did meant nothing because they didn't put some magic words out there, right? It's all performative.
Well, that's what it's performative, but that's why, yes. But even if, I want you to get that point of the problem we're seeing with demanding apologies rather than actually offering forgiveness. And demanding apologies is we've done this. I'm talking not even about, like, the movement here. I'm just talking about human psychology and, like, a relationship with your lover. And if you got in a fight and you're demanding an apology, this is a relationship where communication is actually broken down.
But I don't think
rather than giving forgiveness.
But like, here's the thing with forgiveness and all that here, right? Collectively, no. Like, there's nothing that you need to apologize to me for, and there's nothing I need to, and vice versa, right? There's no apology on a societal level. So, like, those scenes of those white people begging for forgiveness, that is, to me, so repulsive. Like, that taking on that guilt. But so, yes, we have to be able to.
They're the ones who need to apologize.
Okay, yes, we as a society just need to be able to forgive ourselves and forgive each other, because there's a problem here. But that's something that I think has to be done on a personal level, where you just, I'm going to let it all go. There should be no, these stupid gestures of taking a knee or whatever. Like,
but wait a second. I'm trying to talk, and yes, like I think you're a little too hung up on the critical theory stuff, to be honest.
Maybe I am. I don't know.
You're probably online a little bit too much these days. It's really nice to step away from it, because it can drive you fucking crazy. And that's why you reached out to me like, let's talk about all this madness. And I think it's driving you crazy, because when I say, just talking about the superheroes again, I'm going to get this from Mr. Rogers, who's kind of a real superhero, who was very Christian, by the way. But, and this is where he's getting his notion of forgiveness, and that we could talk about that and whatever. But I think in his documentary and in his film and in his writing, he said, it's very simple, but forgiveness is the act of releasing someone from the anger you feel towards them. And it can be a someone or a something, whatever, like that's forgiveness. Forgiveness actually is granted from within. No one ever needs to even ask for it. You can give it. And this is, again, Christianity kind of lays claim to this notion. I think I'm thinking about this too, because Hannah Arendt places a lot of it as Christianity being this notion of forgiveness. But what Killmonger couldn't do was forgive his circumstance and the things that happened to him. What Magneto couldn't do is forgive the darkness of humanity and those Nazis. Like the bad guys, what Joker couldn't do, and he's a different case because there's also other issues, but couldn't forgive these awful things that happened to him to a point where he probably snapped. And then you have this other problem where he's now maybe psychotic, but Magneto is not. He's rational. And Killmonger is not. He's also rational. He's just very angry and he couldn't forgive. And to bring in your theory stuff and why it is so maddening is that you and I both know what I just said is totally obvious and totally like a good idea in the way that societies need to operate, the way that relationships need to operate, the way that friendships need to operate is really based on this notion of, whether you grant it or not, the ability to forgive. And that's like what all kind of society is. That's the glue of a lot of things that we do to each other as humans. And yes, the critical theory, and I'm putting the blame on the media now, amplifying it even more, as you know, is making that not just an act of, not just an impossible act, but a cowardly act. And now I'm specifically talking about black people forgiving white people or cops or racism or redlining or whatever. They're saying to forgive, you read this kind of stuff, like to forgive genuinely would be some sort of internalized racism or acting white or whatever. That's very, 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 very dangerous, because it's literally, I want to reemphasize, it's literally what made Killmonger the bad guy. It's what made Malcolm X so unhelpful early on. People talking about calling people porch monkeys and Uncle Toms and stuff. Jackie Robinson, the first black player ever to play Major League Baseball, Malcolm X called him an Uncle Tom. And he used to call Martin Luther King, of course, an Uncle Tom. And he started to change. But what's so tragic about the Malcolm X story, and why I read it as almost a direct analogy to the Killmonger story in Black Panther, was as he hopefully, and I think really started to see the problem of him being unable to forgive, and it causing him to literally say things. I could pull up the quote in the line, but praising God and asking him for more favors of plane crashes that kill white people, while sort of smirking about it in an interview with the French press in his early days, noticing that was such a not just harmful thing for him, but probably harmful thing for the movement that he wanted to be a part of. And he started to try to leave it and started to try to reform from it. It literally killed him. They literally came for him and killed him when he started to turn against Elijah Muhammad and the Black Muslim movement and all that. It literally killed him the way that Killmonger, it literally killed him. And if you go so deep into this stuff, you will reach the point, like Malcolm X, like Killmonger, like Magneto, where it will kill you if you try to leave it. And that's not a facetious analogy when it comes to Malcolm X. It's not just a story that you hear in superhero stories. You can analogize it however you want, but it's a notion that we have to defend. And of course, you know this just as well as I do, because obviously you're spending more time with it. The whole problem of the wokeism religion is you cannot apologize.
No, you can't.
You cannot. So like you said, it's performative, but it's also false. It's a false lore, because its entire meaning is based on actually never granting forgiveness, but eternally apologizing
Oh yeah,
more and more.
Oh, but they say it
So at
straight
some
out.
point-
They say
yeah,
it
at
straight
some
out
point
that
you have to get off the fucking road because it's going to kill you. That's not what civilization was built on. It's also like the most unchristian thing to pull on Hannah Arendt if you're going to. Obviously, forgiveness has existed elsewhere, but they do emphasize it quite a bit, the turn the other cheek stuff. And the black community happens to be insanely Christian, which is where you would also like hope some of this, and I'm sure this is happening, and I'm being overly generally here. Of course, the black community is very conservative, it turns out, and also like philosophically conservative. The loudest voices you hear are the young woke ones and leading the movement or whatever. But this kind of conversation is also one that needs to be won within the black community. And if they use Christianity to do with it, which would be very interesting, because I did see the thing about taking down white Jesus, forgiveness is the key for us to at least starting to have a conversation. And I don't know who they like. No one needs to apologize, but it's forgiveness for even their own parents or whatever it is. We need, if we're going to start making progress. This is what happened in South Africa with the restorative justice kind of movement, to limited success as it was. It's a philosophical notion that I hate that religion sort of lays claim to, because it's a really good one, just on a purely secular society building thing. But it's missing from the conversation. So yeah, I know you get it, but the difference of demanding an apology and not offering forgiveness, which is bullshit and performative from both sides, is so dreadfully toxic, and it's driving me crazy also, just like you, without being online as much as you.
But I mean, I think that, there's got to be a way where, as a society, like, take a step back and then, how, figuratively or whatever, you come to terms with it. You forgive the other side. You forgive yourself for whatever. Like, there's a lot of shit going on. But I mean, if you want to do something, like, instead of these performative things, and some people will, oh, that's not enough, right? Like, get your neighbors together and do something nice for the neighborhood, for Christ's sakes, right? Like that's a form of forgiveness. But yeah, again, like, I think we're right now at two conflicting stories, and this was, or maybe three at this point. I think you've got Rauch's thing, you've got the liberal science, but then at this point we've got the fundamentalist and the humanitarian threat, and it's getting harder and harder to tell the two apart.
Yeah.
And
horseshoe is happening.
Well, it's not. I'm sorry. It's been a circle for a few years now. It's but it has.
Yeah, I can't tell the difference either. Yeah.
I mean, Black Lives Matter asking for segregated dorms on campuses and getting it on a bunch, and the KKK cheering them on. I mean, come on. Like, they're asking for the exact same thing. Like, there is an issue there when, if you say you're for Black lives and you're doing something and the KKK cheers you on, you might want to take a step back.
Yeah,
just maybe, or that's just me, right? Like, but yeah, no, I think.
And then don't underestimate the absolute turbocharger of the media pushing all of that circle, and we have an election year coming up that is bonkers in the middle of a pandemic, which is something that doesn't care about anything we said.
Okay, but there's the media as well, right?
Yeah.
You had doctors coming out. You had doctors in the epidemiologists saying, "Oh, racism is a worse virus than COVID."
Okay, it's very, very scary.
Okay, that's scary
that they're doing that. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
but then
the courts might be holding, but it doesn't seem like the top medical professionals are holding.
Okay, but then you're looking at the coverage of all these protests, blah 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 blah. No one's talking about the spike in LA. LA is now like the hot spot in the US. No one's talking about that. And I'm not saying, like, obviously it's not, the protests happened today. It takes a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. But Trump has a stupid thing in Tulsa. The next day, the largest daily increase in COVID cases the day after Trump's rally. Okay, that's factual, but it's not truthful, because the rally has nothing to do with the next day's increase in COVID, right?
Yeah.
So
they're chasing headlines, and it's very, very damaging.
It's not doing anything. I mean, honestly, unfortunately, it's like I'm sounding like one of the, like, an Antifa person. Like, but we need an overhaul. We need an actual overhaul, or we need a reset. Like, you go back to the last screen, like the last save screen on when you're playing a video game, and that would be like around 98. Like, we need to do a reset back to then. What had been working up to that point? Because after that point, I think that's when we focused on, okay, this is a problem of racism. This is a problem of sexism. This is where it might be an issue, but it's not the problem, right? You're not solving the problem. You're solving the secondary thing. And if you go looking, like, like that, the thing in St. Louis there I was telling you about. So if you go looking for racism there, you're not going to solve it. But if you go looking for the oppression because of all these different police departments or something, and then maybe you can get you get a ticket in one district, one community. Every cop along the way, you just show them the ticket and they just let you go because you've already been fined. Like that would fix the problem. But if you go looking to fix racism, that's never going to get solved. And I think we reset back to '98 and just say what was working. And no, but honestly, like I'm using that as an arbitrary date.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah. It's pre-social media. It's right on the cusp. I think we should be talking about. And when I mean social media, I also just mean its effect on old school media. Yes, and the influx of kids who maybe lived through a decadent '80s who were suddenly entering those institutions that would help bring them down. People are compromised by these things. There's how I feel about the balance between libertarianism. I mean, I'll end this on a pessimistic note because I'm actually not optimistic about the United States being able to see its way out of a lot of these things. I don't know how quick this downfall is going to be, and I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I'm not saying total anarchy and collapse of society, but it just seems that when I give people the benefit of the doubt, even the critical theory people, of why were they attracted to it in the first place, it seems to be, or why is the media? I'm looking at the stats right now. Do you know how many people have been killed since George Floyd by cops in this country? This is public data. Washington Post.
I think I heard there's something like 120.
Not quite. This is from, well, not according to that. So from May 26th, which is the day after he got killed, 74 is what's showing on the Washington Post data. A lot of the stuff is unknown to this point, where they start to release more and more. People just sort of track it down about like what the race was and everything. So not a lot of this is known. But 46% of them were white, 29% black, which is actually down from the year average, 21 Hispanic, 2% Asian. You didn't hear about any of them except for Rayshard Brooks, which I'm looking at it now, and I have all the data points here now. The only one that had no gun, black man, body cam. The only one. It's a taser. There's whites. There's plenty of whites that are showing up without guns, but no body cam, so it's not as good. Actually, here's one. Oh, they had a gun named Cody Cook. Many of the names aren't released yet. The media creating the narrative, or let's say they would say not creating it, but enforcing the narrative and having the fuel of academia and the critical theory stuff behind them to justify it in some way, to give them the benefit of the doubt with some sort of conspiracy theory, Alex Jonesy stuff. It's just the incentive of the market. The ratings were the highest they've ever been. Sean Hannity makes $40 million a year. Every single congressman and woman has increased their wealth exponentially in the last couple of decades. This is also sort of a new thing. Like if we just say this is economic forces and the market being in contact with things that it really corrupts, whether that's science, whether that's the media, there's certain things that we don't want market forces to touch. It's why I defended lifetime appointments for Supreme Court justices, which might feel counterintuitive upon first thing, but I'm saying like, no, keep the market out of that. And I'm saying markets generally being like, I don't want anybody thinking about keeping their job when they're on the bench. I want them to be trying to punt on fourth down when it makes sense and go forward on fourth down when it makes sense and do the best job and interpret things. So if it's incentives and markets that are touching things that corrupt them very quickly and let's say drive them to the loudest voices in the room, the places of the room that are worth the most money, which we know is outrage clicks, which we know they're afraid of bans, which we know becomes literally performative. Everything becomes a signal. Even companies putting out Black Lives Matter, you're like, come on, you're selling shoes. It starts to corrupt things in ways that I don't even need to explain to you because they're so obvious. And then when you add in America as a nation, as the founding story of this nation is the obsession and love of the free market. And you could throw in free speech into that to a certain degree, but not really, because I think free speech is also misunderstood and it's more about, like we talked about earlier about compelled speech rather than free speech. But America being in love with markets, I don't see them. If you're saying hit the reset button to 1998, immediately in my head, I'm like, yes, get the market further away from the media, market forces. Let them operate like they have lifetime appointments rather than being subject to what's happening on Twitter. Get things further away from the market forces. The market is great. at houses and pencils and coffee cups and things and material goods. It's great at a lot of things. It should not be touching science. It should not be touching academia. We're talking a lot about academia, and just talk about the market of how fucking expensive it got and how the students took over is also just a story of economics of the deans and the presidents. I know my father was in academia. He's like terrified of the students because they have all the money. So suddenly, if the students complain about you to the dean, they're like, well, who's, that person, their dad probably or mom pays $50,000 a year for them to go here. So I think you should give them what they want.
But if you got rid of the administrators, like I've been speaking to teachers, like elementary school teachers, right? I've spoken to a few of them, in the States and stuff, and they're going out asking for donations so they can put a pencil sharpener in their classroom. But then the school will go out and hire another couple of administrators at $120,000 a year. Okay, and these administrators are pushing this bullshit. Same thing in universities. Like right during COVID, they were talking about laying off doctors because there wasn't enough people going to the emergency rooms.
Yeah.
Screw that. Lay off the fucking administrators that are going to bring in this diversity bullshit, right? So if the schools got rid of some of these high ticket jobs that do nothing but cause division.
But why are they there in the first place?
Well, because
the students were demanding it.
Or the Title IX, the state was demanding it.
Why was the Title IX?
Okay.
I think you have to trace these back to responding to market forces.
Okay, is it responding to market forces, or is it we got to fix racism? This guy comes in, tells you how to fix racism, and then you create this office where students can go. I
mean, it's
okay. Yes,
don't be so conspiratorial with it. Like,
I'm not being
conspiracy with just corruption of a market. It's like people demanding this crazy shit. They get the crazy shit, and they have all the money.
Okay,
crazy shit states.
People are demanding crazy shit, but when I was at university, I remember someone freaking out because the Canadian Blood Services came out with new rules due to AIDS, right? Due to HIV and due to AIDS, and protests and this and that. Oh my God, you're bringing back eugenics. I mean, someone actually said that, all right? But the adults in the room were able to say, you know what, you're being silly. Now the adults are encouraging them. They're encouraging the silliness. They're not protest, and they weren't upset that these kids were protesting something they thought that was wrong. They were okay with that. They were protesting the bad argumentation. Now the teachers and the administrators are leading the bad argumentation. So there is a problem there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not, again, this is not a univariant thing, right? Yes. But if you're teaching kids that this is the issue, and then they turn around and protest it, is it the kid, then the administration buckles and gives what the kids want? The kids wouldn't know what to want.
Being a professor, though, we have less free will. Like you're compromised, you're biased, whether you know it or not. Call it implicit. To choose, they happen to choose the theory that all the kids are clamoring for that makes them feel better, rather than telling them they're wrong and them all giving you a bad review and demanding that you get fired and you lose your tenure. It's like
you don't take the kids.
Imbalanced,
you don't take the kids that seriously, right? But also, again, when did?
But just to like point, because I'm gonna have to jump in a second. This is like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say we should get going soon.
If anybody's still listening, with that thing about America and the United States being addicted to this, is my solution here is like, what is it? It's either is to escape those market forces just by growing a damn backbone, like maybe the University of Chicago letter that was so famous, being like, listen, we're not going to coddle your kids, although they have plenty of that happening at University of Chicago still now. So growing a damn backbone is one thing, but then it's like, no, how do we make them more like Supreme Court judges? How do we have them work for the state? That if the state can hold and the courts can hold, that they're protected, and their job in society is actually to teach the kids the truth, not be activists and make activists.
But I mean, 10 years,
nation like the United States,
10 years,
it's not going to do that.
Like tenure, sort of like that. But I think they should give tenure. I think one of the ways of getting tenure, one of the qualifications you need to have, is that you do have the backbone before you have it. Okay, obviously not to be a complete and utter asshole, but you do have the backbone to go where the information leads you.
But Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
yeah. So
no, but
yes,
and the university shouldn't be so quick to punish. You know, again, this is a form of to teach the kids, and you can call it indoctrination, but you know, just because you're upset, you know, it doesn't mean that you have to go running to an adult. And again, that's, you know, the helicopter parenting. Did that play a role in it? Like, you know, there's all kinds of different things. So yeah, I mean, like, you have to get the kids, you know, whatever. University, I shouldn't be calling them kids, but you should be able to get them to say that just because I disagree with this, I don't need to go run to an adult. Like, granted, if the teacher does say something horrific, like, you know, makes an overtly sexual comment or overtly racist, but there was a teacher, I think she was fired because she was discussing, I can't remember what she was discussing, but it had the word nigger in it, and she got fired because she was talking about a speech someone gave, and it was like a black person or whatever. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, like, how am I supposed to talk about Huck Finn if I can't use that word?
Yeah,
You know,
but so just don't be the old man, you know, shaking your fist at the crowd or cloud. Talk about, it was a very obvious one, like talking about Huck Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird were just banned or whatever.
Yeah, in Minneapolis.
They say the N word, and they don't want to, like, whatever. But why was that professor fired? Just talk about, use their language. Where are the power structures here? Yeah. And they're all economic. It's because those kids pay the damn bills for the university, and so they win the argument. You don't need much deeper analysis to that. I could build a spreadsheet for it and show you, but it's like, if we start with basic, like, why and where are these things happening, and the power structures, why doesn't the teacher feel empowered to that? Yes, grow a backbone, get better deans, whatever. But if I'm looking for solutions and my answer is grow a backbone, everyone, I'm going to lose to someone say, here's $1 million.
Okay,
like, let's talk about incentives, how to realign them to produce.
But why is tuition so high? One of the reasons tuition's so high is because of all these extra administrators, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm
not saying it's like all the of course they
so one of the ways to get out of this mess is make tuition cheaper, which I don't think anyone would have an issue with that, except for maybe the universities because they're raking in the money. But
wait, just pause there because I am gonna have to go.
Yeah,
it's the perfect example of, like, make tuition cheaper. Yeah, Bernie fucking Sanders ran on free college. Look what happened to him in this country. Like, Andrew Yang runs on that. Look what happened. The obsession with the anti-handout in America is I'm talking about getting the market away from things it shouldn't be touching, including universities.
Okay, yeah.
And that is a very un-American thing to be talking about. The solutions that you talk about. That's why I'm trying to talk about universal basic income.
I get it.
Better, but anyway, I have to jump.
Yeah, no, I'll let you go. Sorry, we were going a little bit too long, but look, just want to let know people where people can get a hold of you, and I'll put the links and stuff in the description.
Yeah, well, Twitter, I'm on there, although not as much. I'm trying to stay off, and it's been doing good for my mind. I'm writing a book. It's probably years away from coming out. On death and grief in the information age, which should be really interesting, about virtual reality. We didn't talk about this at all, but virtual reality and augmented reality and all kinds of weird things to do with your ashes that people are doing now in the 21st century, and a philosophical endeavor into that. And I write and I do the Dilemma podcast, which is starting up actually really soon, July 6th. There's a very loud bird that's squawking right now, if you hear it.
Yeah, I can hear. But anyways,
this was fun as usual.
Well, whatever. We'll have to continue it some other time. But I'll let you go. Thanks a lot, and thanks everyone for listening.